Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
Hey, everybody, welcome back. It's what was the fourth night, something in a row that we've been streaming. But you know, hey, it's been a little bit more of a quiet time for me, and the weather has gotten darker and gloomier and rain tonight, so it just puts me in an RPG type of mood. If I keep this up, I might be a real streamer. So welcome back for another night of gluttonous punishment as we continue our deep dive. Look, there's a reason I call it a deep dive. These RPGs are not for kids. They're deep. Going into the nuances of it takes a fair amount of time. So welcome, everyone, back. We had a really fun stream yesterday. We took a look at Secrets. I was going to say Shadow. Secrets of the Weird Wizard. Or no, we did Shadow of the Weird Wizard. Secrets is the name of the GM guide, so it's actually both. Which has some really, really interesting ideas, but also felt strangely burdened by some legacy 3rd edition stuff. Now, I love 3rd edition. You could say it's my favorite RPG of all time. So it's a very complicated relationship that I have with the game. But most importantly, we were able yesterday during that first look stream to complete our tip goal, which was for Derek to try to convince Bob and company to get over here into the studio and inaugurate the studio with maybe running a one ring session or two. Probably the new starter box, I think, would be a cool place to start. And that'd be a lot of fun. We also started bandying around the idea, as I've become aware, is that the Moria book actually has a pretty detailed set of solo rules in it in the back, designed by Sean Tompkin, who did Ironforged and Ironsworn and Starforged. And I'm not a big fan of solo games. I think they're kind of neat in principle, but it's not really my thing. However, I do think it'd be kind of cool. And I know that other people have done these kind of solo type games. Me, Myself, and I very famously does them. But I thought it would be cool to maybe try to figure out a way that we could figure out how to do it with the stream. So we'd be doing it live. And I don't know if that means that like all of you would become the game masters and I would be the player, because it's again, I haven't really delved into the Moria book. I haven't delved into the Moria book, but I certainly haven't delved too deep. But I do think it'd be kind of a cool experiment to try and get around with it. Because again, I don't know really how else or when else I'm actually going to get this really cool game to the table. Twitch plays Tor. Exactly. So we were, so it's not again, my understanding is that it's a little bit more procedural than a typical solo game. And that was my thought, Cineboss. I mean, obviously there's things like the Mythic Game Master Emulator. What's going on? What happened? Oh no, what happened? Hold on. Hold on. Oh my goodness, my stupid thing fell apart again. What is going on? Why does that happen sometimes? Interesting. My thing is causing me problems again. I don't know why it does that sometimes. Let me try closing this, and did I close it entirely? Yeah, hold on a sec here. Close. Okay. It should be activated. Activated. Okay. Hello. Okay, there we go. I don't know. Sometimes it's weird. Yeah, we did just get started. We haven't really gotten into anything yet. Again, for me, role-playing games are fundamentally a social hobby, and I think the storytelling aspects of role-playing games are cool, and I definitely think you can get that with the solo games, and I think they're a cool way to challenge your creativity and, almost like a writing exercise, which I think is really interesting, which is really fun. But that's not really why I play role-playing games. I play role-playing games more for the community aspect, the social aspect, the collaborative aspect. And normally you don't really get that. However, if we're doing it live and we're doing it with chat, and chat is sort of filling in as kind of the oracle tables, as Cineboss was saying, I think that's kind of interesting. I think that's kind of neat. So, but yeah, so we completed that tip goal. So I will, I'm going to talk to Bob. I'm going to see who else maybe is interested to come on and maybe we can play some games. I don't know. But failing that, or even in addition to that, maybe we'll try to do some sort of Moria solo campaign. But we do have a new tip goal, which is the dental repair fund. I was at the dentist yesterday, and unfortunately, one of my fillings is chipped, and it needs to be fixed / repaired. And of course, I don't have a job, and that also meant I don't have insurance. So it's going to be, kind of expensive. Anyways, so, if you feel like donating and tipping, it would be very appreciated. I kind of put up there tongue in cheek, or in this case, tongue in dental chip, but I appreciate you anyways. Yeah, well, no, in this case, Jacob Online, it's a little bit more simpler than that. You see, I got braces a couple of years ago. I got the Invisalign, and it realigned my teeth, which were always kind of jacked up a little bit. If you go back and watch old videos, you'll see that. But years ago, I had gone to an orthodontics, and they basically said, well, the problem is you have a underbite. You know, my bottom teeth project a little bit too far. So what they wanted to do was like break my jaw and like remove some bone and then like set my jaw back. Obviously, I said, fuck that. So I got the Invisalign, which is great. But now my front teeth, or my top teeth and my bottom teeth, are like almost perfectly aligned. And so what can happen is that my top teeth can kind of come down right onto my bottom teeth. And that actually chipped out the filling that was there. And actually, I think the reason it was there to begin with was because of, so ironically, my braces is what caused this problem. So, yeah. But hey, the price we pay for beauty, right? Anyways, I would like to get that fixed, and I don't know. It'll probably be without insurance. It'll probably be, you know, who knows, $400, $500. Unfortunately, I just found out that my dentist, who I like a lot, actually, he's still there, but I just found out because I got the bill for the dental cleaning, and it was a different billing organization, and I went, oh no, he didn't sell to a dental service organization, and sure enough, he did. He was he sold out to private equity. So for those of you who don't know, this has become a reoccurring problem throughout the United States, which is that private equity has been basically buying up dental offices and, you know, basically consolidating them because they think they're really good ROIs. And they come in, they offer a dentist, you know, who knows, tens of millions of dollars. I don't even know. I can't even imagine how much they offer them. And they basically say, hey, we want to buy your practice. And don't worry, you don't have to change anything. But then, of course, now it's owned by a private equity fund who is going to try to inevitably, I'm sure, try to milk and extort the patients for profit, because that's why they invested in the dental offices. They certainly didn't invest in the dental offices to increase the standards of care and, you know, try to make things cheaper and more affordable to people who desperately need them. But yeah. Right. And then at the same time, they probably take them out of whatever network you were in so that they can, again, continue to drive profit. So it's a whole thing. How people are okay with this situation, it shocks me. It's crazy. All right. Well, with that being said, last time we did this, Monday, we were apparently a little bit overconfident because I said we were going to do combat, councils, and journeys, and we did exactly combat. So today, we're going to be doing council. And never mind my hands looking very saturated. I turned up the saturation. I mean, we're not actually going to be using this. I just, you know, I wanted to highlight how pretty this book is. And it is a very pretty book. So we're going to be doing the council. We're going to start today with the council section. Now, as a reminder, this was the combat section that we spent the last session on. And this is all part of the adventuring phase. So we're going to be doing council. We're going to go to the PDF here in a second. And then there's the journey phase. So council is up first. And let's get into it. Shall we? Shall. Okay, I'm back. All right. So this is a semi-form of social combat, social conflict, as I understand it. However, I think it should be noted that like most social conflict, it is not necessarily meant for, you know, randomly meeting a stranger along the side of the road or asking the innkeeper to let you stay in the barn overnight even though you don't have any money, right? That is where we simply use a simple skill check will do. Councils are for the major important decision-making processes in the game. And obviously, very famously, there is, of course, the Council of Elrond. But, you know, even in the films, vis-a-vis the books, there are other important councils that we see. There's the council where they try to, where they're convincing Theoden to come to Gondor's aid should they ask for it. You can argue that there's a council where they try to convince Denethor to ask for the aid. Beowulf, you know, for someone you are the person who complains the most about the strangest tiny little things. Are you OCD? And if you aren't, and if you aren't, are you aware that you are? Here, I'm going to do this just to bother just to bother Beowulf. I'm going to put the thing right there. Optimize the space. Son of a bitch. Yeah. Well, your wife is correct. Right. Where was Gondor when the Westfold fell? Exactly. So, you know, there's a lot of these cool instances, moments in the game where important decisions, you know, are being made. And typically it's going to involve someone who needs, you know, presumably convincing. Now, I'm interested because while I'm sure that these rules are going to be okay, there have been a lot of really cool, I'll call them innovations, I'll call them tech, that have evolved, that have come out in the last couple of years around social conflicts, which I really, really like. In fact, one of those right there just came in the mail today. So I got my Draw Steel books finally. Very cool. And of course, Draw Steel has boy, this is a thick book. Draw Steel, of course, has a very, very, very involved section on negotiations, right? There's an entire sub-game of negotiations. So, and believe it or not, these rules, I think, are really, really good. So it'll be interesting to see how, you know, this responds or how this varies compared to the other one. I will say, going back to it, I will say that between these two books, this is Moria. Between these two books, let me see if I can zoom out here a little bit. So between these two books, I will say that I vastly prefer this one. Now, even though these books are, you know, roughly the same page count, I absolutely love the textured, you know, matte finish of this cover. This book is almost 400 pages. It's 396 pages. And I know this is stupid. It's almost 400 pages. There's no ribbon. This book, obviously, sports a lovely, lovely, lovely ribbon. But not only that, this paper is thick and has, you know, tooth to it. You know, this paper is, it feels like magazine paper, you know, like when you get a magazine, the edges feel really weak and thin. It doesn't even feel like, I feel like if I turn the page too quickly, I really do feel like I would rip the page. So yeah, but obviously they are able, you know, and it's got this very, obviously you can see how glossy the cover is here with this light, you know, with it shining off my light. Whereas this obviously is matte. You know, there's a little bit of a UV coating here on this emblem, but it's just really, you know, beautiful. And then, you know, on top of that, of course, it's just, you know, obviously this book is not even, this book isn't even 250 pages. So this book is 400 pages and this book is 250 pages, and they are, you know, roughly the same. In fact, the Lord of the Rings One Ring book is probably thicker. So you're fitting 250 pages here and 400 pages here. And, you know, and of course, obviously you can see from the light that the pages are that kind of magazine gloss. You know, you can see how glossy the page is. You know, I don't want to say that Draw Steel skimped on the art. I mean, there's definitely art. You know, there's a piece of art. this is all just, there's a piece of art, two pieces of art. I don't think, I wouldn't say they skimped on art. Apparently a lot of these pieces are reused, I guess, which is a possibility. But yeah. Anyways, I mean, I'm just such a fan of the way that Free League does their books anyway. So, I mean, that's kind of just me being. You know, and also too, I mean, I'm not a publisher or anything like that, but I'm willing to bet you that this image, you know, probably cost a fraction of what a single, you know, Daggerheart or Draw Steel piece would cost. But, you know, from my perspective, I like this piece of art just as much as I like anyone else, you know. Yeah, I mean, Jordan, I think the problem, we're like we're going on like a massive rabbit hole here. I'm trying to see where I have I think it's downstairs. Never mind. But I think the problem is that people are comparing. You know, Daggerheart to. People are comparing Daggerheart to Draw Steel, or I should say they're comparing Draw Steel to Daggerheart. And I think the problem with that is that, yes, I mean, you know, Daggerheart is on another level, you know, when it comes to the art. So if we look at these books here, get my microphone out of the way. If you look at, you know, the things like the layout, the color, the way that the art is incorporated, it's just a, you know, it's just a nicer integration. You know, like look at how like the class, you know, each class follows this spread. You've got this dynamic piece of art here coming into this whole color thing. You know, this is the 2-page spread for the sorcerer. Here is the 2-page spread for the warrior. Here is the 2-page spread for the wizard. You know, Draw Steel has a lot of page, you know, I'm not saying it has a ton of, you know, but there's a lot of pages like this. You know, there's this random piece of artwork here, and then the rest of it is literally just text. This page literally is, you know, 3-4 full columns of text, and look at how much white space is down here. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, when you're talking about today's RP, I mean, that's a lot of real estate, honestly, when you think about that on this page. So I do think, you know, here's another one, just a massive chunk of white space. So I do think that there is a point to be made, you know, and then, okay, you get this little picture up here, and then again, it's just, you know, Draw Steel just has a lot of text. You know, that's part of the problem. So, anyways. Where's this book? It is very pretty. I also like that this book, Daggerheart, I like how it switches up between these really nice pieces of art and these. I love the sketch drawings, especially here in the community and ancestry parts, but also throughout the book. And, you know, Daggerheart's not afraid to use colors and, you know, to help distinguish between tables and, you know, bullet points with different heading and fonts. So, yeah. True, George, that's true, except a couple of things. Number one, Darrington Press is not Critical Role. I mean, yes, Critical Role obviously started, the people who run Critical Role started it, but to assume that Critical Role is somehow, you know, losing money on Daggerheart, I don't think is appropriate. Number two, I mean, you know, MCDM did kickstart and generate, I don't know, $4 or $5 million or something like that. So, I mean, in terms of money raised, it's, yeah. Anyways, so this is why we never get anything done. So we're going to look at counsels. So adventurers meet many travelers and wanderers along the road. Whenever they deal with strangers, they should exercise some caution. as theirs is a trade considered peculiar and sometimes dangerous by common folk. Even when meeting foes of the common enemy, players should mind their tongue. When the company meets one or more lore master characters in a formal gathering, a council occurs. So that's the idea, right? You're meeting them in a formal gathering. While much of what transpires in a council can simply be played out as dialogue between the company and the lore master, the rules presented in this chapter are particularly appropriate to determine the progress of a meeting and its consequences. TLDR, I do not believe that it is proper or right that we should stop playing a game just because we're in a scene with people instead of fighting. I don't know how to fight in real life. My character does. We use the game rules to determine who wins the fight. Maybe your character is particularly good at convincing people or awing people or endearing people to your cause. And maybe in real life, you are not. Now, just like in a combat scene, I hope that we aren't just simply going, I stride, I strike, I raise shield and turn. Right? There's there's fun to be had and in spicing this up, what we call fluffy bullshit time. I think that's a cool part of a role-playing game. But I am pro social encounter. I think that these rules are particularly interesting and unique. And furthermore, although I'm sure this game does not go down that line, I am actually pro social encounter against the PCs. In other words, we use game rules to determine if a PC lives or dies. I also think that using game rules to determine if a PC's mind is changed or feels a certain way about a certain situation can make for a really, really interesting game. And I think that the challenge of a role-playing game is taking the mechanics that happen because of dice rolls, and then it is your job to sell that as part of the actions of your character. But that is neither here nor there. Neither here nor there. This specifically is for getting people to, get stuff over. Now, and I agree with Beowulf. Player skill and character skill to affect combat and social interactions. I couldn't agree with you more. Because, again, as the third rule of Dungeon Craft says, you can apply this more broadly. Ray Wininger said, the greatest D&D adventures challenge both the players and the characters. But you can expand that and basically just say the greatest RPG encounters challenge the player and the character. And, I think that combat can certainly do that. And I think social encounters can and should do that as well. And I don't necessarily, that to me does not necessarily mean that a social encounter is a challenge of role-playing. And role-playing in the classic, modern day version of, play acting. I don't think that your ability to role-play should have anything to do with how well the DM rewards you or penalizes you in any encounter, let alone a social encounter. I think that is very fraught. However, if you know an NPC's motivation, if you know what an NPC's pain points are, if you know what an NPC's secret desires are, what in Legend of the Five Rings we would call their ninjo, if you know what an NPC's personality is like and what kind of approaches they respond positively to and which kind of approaches they respond negatively to, then I think the same way that in combat we might go, oh, that monster is weak, is vulnerable to fire. They're an ice monster. We should use fire attacks because that's going to make us more effective in combat. Or someone saying, hey, wait, let me go flank the monster so that that I get a bonus to attack and you can sneak attack, right? So we're using player decisions to take advantage of what we know about the situation and what we know about the rules and coming up with a better outcome for our characters. I think the same thing is true in a social encounter, and it's having that sort of tactical grip that I think is so important and I think is so critical to having social encounters be successful. I think one of the number one reasons in any game system that things like skill challenges fall so flat, and to be fair, I mean I played them in 4th edition. I think skill challenges are mostly terrible, is because what they really are is just a bunch of skill checks in a row. And the problem with skill checks in almost every single RPG is skill checks have no space for the player or to make a choice. You just roll the die and hope you roll well. So, we'll see what these social encounter rules have. I'm actually not super optimistic, but we'll see. But what I will say is that there have been some certain advances, and I think Draw Steel, their negotiation system, is a good system overall. It's a little bit convoluted. It could be a little bit complicated, but I think the intrigue system from Legend of the Five Rings can also potentially be a very strong, or has a lot of interesting ideas. But I think some way there's something there that we can get to, because I think the problem with social encounters isn't that they're social encounters and that people are like not role playing. The problem is that most of the time they're very boring, because you don't have the kind of options. It would be like going into a combat and there's no movement, there's no bonuses to hit, there's no penalties to hit. It's just when it's your turn, you make your attack roll. If you hit, you do your damage from your weapon next. And we keep doing that until the enemy dies. Now, if you did that, it would be really, really boring, especially if your character couldn't die. And in my opinion, one of the things about most social encounters is that they are played out as, we're just going to endlessly spam checks. There's not a whole lot of tactical decision making that we can make. There's not a whole lot of choices that we can make. And so that's like a really boring combat. And we can't die, because there's no way that we can lose the social encounter in a way that would be deleterious to our characters. Now, if you've seen my Torchbearer games, you'll know that Torchbearer does not work that way. When you're engaged in a negotiation type encounter, if your party loses it, they have to make concessions, which can include your characters basically going, maybe that NPC is right. Maybe, and actually now it is the same way that if I cursed your character or reduced your character to 0, or I cut off your character's arm, you now have to play and live with the consequences, both mechanical and, I suppose, psychological, of those effects. And everyone's fine with that. I suppose some people might have problems with people cutting off their arms, but, it could happen in the right time of game. But people go, oh, well, that's just the way it works, Sometimes you get killed. And it's really funny that for a lot of people, there are a lot of people who would say, I would rather they are completely fine with the GM having the ability to kill their character, right? By using mechanics, right? I'm going to attack you. Your hit points are at 0. You're dead. And everyone goes, well, that's just the rules of the game. That's just how it works. But if you say, hey, the NPC makes a check or whatever like that, and your character starts to maybe come around to their point of view, most people have a really hard time with that. Sorry, I missed a lot of chat there. Jake says, mechanics that can change a PC's opinions are so fraught, but I like them. I honestly think they're some of my most favorite elements in any role-playing game system. And I actually think that having your PC's mood or opinion or beliefs changed through the mechanics of the game, actually, I think the reason people don't like them is because I actually think it's the highest level of challenge that a role player can be called to do. Because it's very easy to role play your character the way you want to role play them. But when the mechanics of the game, let's say we're playing Avatar Legends, a PBTA game, and I make your character angry, or if we're playing Torchbearer and I make your character angry, number one, that has a mechanical consequence. Cool. But your character is angry. And you're like, no, they're not. My character isn't angry. And I'm like, yes, your character is angry. It would be no different than, me reducing your hit points to 0 and informing you that your character is unconscious. And a player going, no, they're not. They're not unconscious. They wouldn't have gone unconscious from that attack. I know my PC. They wouldn't have fallen unconscious there. They're stronger than that. And you go, no, sorry, you're unconscious. Nobody has that conversation. We all agree that at 0 hit points, your character's unconscious. So for me, it's no different. And what's funny about this is you might say, well, that's because people don't like being told how to play their characters. And yet, if that same exact conversation were to occur because of a magical spell, say a charm spell, then suddenly people don't have the same problem. They go, oh, yeah, okay, I'm charmed. And I think part of the problem is because I don't think people really appreciate fully how in real life, no one ever thinks that they're being convinced. And yet you're being convinced of things every single day by your friends, your loved ones, your spouse, your children, your parents, your bosses, you know what I mean? Advertisers, right? You are going in, right. The advertising doesn't work on me, Jacob. You know, that's what everybody says. Everybody says advertising doesn't work on me. It's also like, for example, something like 85% of people believe that they are an above average driver, right? 85% of people believe that they are an above average driver, when obviously that is not the case. Only 50% or 49% of people can be an above average driver, but almost double the number of people think that they're an above average driver. So that's right, Scorpio. People are being convinced right now. That's right. And if I'm failing, it's because my character didn't roll well enough. Or maybe you have really, really high defenses. Advertising doesn't work on me, said everyone who just bought their 9th Warhammer 40K army. But I promise you it's totally different this time. So, yeah. Right, but if we're talking about drivers, GM Scott, then that means we're talking about the count. And if we're talking about the count, then the median doesn't really make a difference in that respect. It's more of like, you know, if you ask people, are you an above average driver? And, you know, 50% of them should say no. Assuming that it's either yes or no. Are you a good driver? Yes or no. I should say that. As opposed to like rate yourself on a scale. All right. You know what? Props to you all for knowing that, right? Anyways, so yeah, Woodland Fellowship. I like to differentiate it as creative challenge versus a technical challenge. Yeah, I mean, either way, as long as you are bringing some of the player into the aspect. And yeah, Rayo Man, I am saying that role-playing is more than just talkie-talkie. But yes, you know, for the certain extent, I believe that the approach that your character takes should matter. Maybe not how you deliver it. That's going to depend on each individual person's, you know, predilation and their own personal ability and their own personal comfort level. But yes, I do believe that similar to combat, where we, you know, as players, we make choices for our characters, and then our characters go and roll dice and do the best they can. I don't see why social conflict should be any different than that. I mean, Dr. Waits, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that part of the fun, part of the appeal of a social encounter is that you can have these really high stakes. Now, to be clear, you know, the Council of Elrond is obviously about as high stakes as they get. You know, in this game, which we know is sort of set at a lower level of stakes than the literal defining quest of an entire multi-thousand-year age. You know, I don't necessarily know that every council is going to be quite so, you know, quite so high stakes. But Commander Snow comes, and here just figured out how I was thinking you didn't put out enough content because I was running out. Here you are streaming even more. I'd like to remind everybody that I streamed Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and now Wednesday, and I'm streaming tomorrow. So yes, I mean, in a typical week, I usually put out what most content creators put out in like a year. So, you know, I'm sorry if you ever run out. Absolutely. I mean, you know, I started with dwarves, and then I got into orcs and goblins, and then I got into high elf, and I got into high elf real bad. I mean, at one point I had like 3 dragons. Oh, man, I had a flying circus high elf army back in 8th edition before they actually killed Warhammer, the original original Warhammer. I never really got into 40K. I had Ultramarines, they were fine. Rayo, man, I've given up on trying to have a conversation with those people. Keith, I think it's great to talk in third person. And in fact, I think that's fantastic. I mean, it's the same way in combat. You don't have to talk in first person in combat. I want you to be engaged. That's all. That's all I want you to do is be engaged, So let's get into it. Councils represent social events of extraordinary importance. Gatherings vital for the success of the company's aims and goals that can be influenced by how they behave. The rules presented in this section should not be adopted for every verbal exchange between the company and the lore master. Everyday circumstances are better represented using the standard rules for a skill roll. To qualify as a council, a meeting must be a formal gathering during which the stakes are high and, depending on the outcome, the company stands to win or lose something valuable. Okay. To achieve their goal in a council, they must achieve a number of successful rolls matching its resistance value. So I'm going to say warning alert number 1. Okay. Because the warning alert number 1 is, you got to get to the certain number of successes. Now, that doesn't necessarily a bad thing. We do need a mechanical way to track this. Clocks are a fine way, but we do have to be mindful of this. To accomplish this, they do have a limited number of attempts at their disposal, their time limit. Okay, so we've set this, that there are stakes. The party has X amount of time to achieve Y amount of successes. Okay? A council is set up and resolved using the following 3 steps. 1, set resistance. 2, introduction. 3, interaction. When the council is concluded, a final step is used to assess its consequences. All right. Set the resistance. Whether you're traveling to Rivendell to petition Master Elrond or seeing the mayor of the Shire, you do it with a purpose. The players should agree on what the company hopes to achieve from the meeting and how to possibly achieve it. What are they asking for? What kind of help are they trying to get? How do they intend to get it? Is there something they are willing to give in return or sacrifice? The resistance rating of the council reflects how hard it will be for the company to achieve their goal and is set from 3 to 9. 3 being a reasonable request, 9 being an outrageous request. To make this evaluation, the lore master evaluates the importance of the objective in relation with the motivation and the expectations of the folk. So basically, if it's outrageous, it's when they are asking the people to do something very dangerous and there's no real possibilities that they'll be helped out or rewarded. So from easy to hard, and obviously you could tweak this a little bit. So we do have some sort of player input here, which is like, hey, what is your core, what is your pitch? Because that's going to set how hard this thing is going to be. At the beginning of the council, the players should focus on a goal and choose their course of action accordingly. In the introduction, the spokesperson presents the company. The role sets the time limit for the company. You might use awe to impress strangers, courtesy to ask for support, or riddle to extract information. Then there's the interaction, the main part of the council, where you make rolls to accumulate. Successful rolls accumulate to match or exceed the resistance. So for starters, we'll see how this works out. I do like that this is a 2-step process because you know what? There's sort of a catch-22 here, which is, look, there's usually that one player in the group who is the face, right? The talker. The problem is I don't want that one PC to dominate or overshadow the rest of the party members and basically say, the rest of you sit down and don't play in this encounter. Because that's the other problem. 99% of the time, everyone can fight in combat. But usually it's only the characters with the good charisma who have maxed out diplomacy who can do anything in a social encounter. That's a big problem. So, but I also think it can be a mistake that, if a person is specialized in this, I want them to have something that they do that makes them feel very, that makes their investment seem worthwhile. So I like that there's this one introductory role for the spokesperson to present the company. It basically gives that face character, right, an opportunity to do something important and really kind of say like, hey, look, this is my thing. Okay, I'm not the combat guy. I'm not the journey guy. I'm the council girl. But that doesn't mean I'm going to dominate the entire encounter and the rest of you are just going to go sit down and wait while I make a bunch of rolls. Instead, I do get a little bit of spotlight to shine, and then we'll all do what we came here to do. So the company makes a roll, and that determines the time limit, which is the total number of attempts the player heroes are granted as a group to present their case before they are finally dismissed. If they fail the roll, it's 3. If they succeed, it's 4. Plus, you get 1 bonus attempt for every Tengwar icon rune rolled. Now, I like this because if you fail, that way it's not just like, yeah, you're basically completely fucked. There's a notable difference here. If you succeed, you might get 4 to 5 attempts. If you fail, you're going to get 3. However, there is one thing here that I'm a little concerned about, which is the heroes are granted as a group. So we'll be on the lookout here to see, is there a reason why you don't just want the people who are really, really good at this to spam this? Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that's a bad thing. You might have characters that are specialized in combat, and you might have characters that are specialized in, councils. And there's nothing wrong with letting certain people, take the lead, I suppose you could say, in certain encounters. And to be clear, remember, this is a different game, okay? This is a different game. We already know that combat is only going to be... See, in D&D, it's pretty much a given that your character should be good at combat because combat's going to happen once, twice, 3 times a session. We already know that it is totally within the realm of possibility that you might have a combat in One Ring every other session. So combat doesn't dominate like it does in other games. So it seems like you could legitimately have a character here who isn't really that good or useful in a combat situation. They might be really good at journeying and counseling, but they are not really good at combat. And that's not going to be a handicap to the group the way that it would be in D&D or Pathfinder 2, where you are getting into a ton of fights. Even Daggerheart says, this is a game about combat, and combat's going to be a big part of Daggerheart. The One Ring is not that game. So, again, there's some mitigating circumstances here. But we talk about the skills that you could be used here. You could use awe, you could use courtesy, you could use riddle. I suppose there's a lot of options here. Now, I should also note that this is an area where, because of the rules that exist in the game, if the players make, again, it's not about role playing, it's not about talking in character, but if the characters do a good job of introducing themselves and, explaining what they are here for, then this game gives us the ability to award you with bonus dice, with bonus D6s, thus making it more likely, 1, that you'll succeed, and 2, that you will roll Tengwar runes and get bonus attempts. Similarly, if this NPC is particularly recalcitrant, or if your group has fucked over the elves before and they are not really wanting to talk to you, if you're going before Thranduil, then I think that is a good example or a good place where you might apply some penalty dice. Also, now this is sort of my Legend of the Five Rings hat, okay? You as a GM might know that this particular NPC would respond very positively to a courteous introduction. And if the player chooses to use a courteous introduction, you might award them with a bonus die or 2 bonus dice. Whereas if the group comes in and tries to sort of, alpha male them with some awe, right? Then you might say this NPC is not particularly motivated, not by the role playing, not by the description, just simply through the use of skill. And this is very similar in some ways to the way Legend of the Five Rings works, where certain NPCs are going to be more easily motivated or more easily convinced or more easily persuaded if you use a certain type of approach. And one of the things that's really cool about the One Ring is we know that the game has a variety of ways that you might interact with people. You might awe them. You might use a song. You might enhearten them. You might use courtesy. You might persuade them. You might riddle with them. And these are virtually sort of the 6 I would call social or semi-social skills. And I mean, you could also, there's an argument that potentially in some certain circumstances, you might be able to, use battle or insight. But honestly, those seem like more like things that other people in the party might use to help you. But like, for example, Jake brings craft and bring a gift to start. For example, maybe someone does make a craft in, say, let's say the fellowship phase, and then you go into the adventuring phase and you present this gift as a form of courtesy. And because you're presenting this gift, which was made in the fellowship phase, the GM gives you 2 bonus dice or 3 bonus dice. Or maybe they even say that your roll is favored and you get to roll basically with advantage. But what's really neat is that all the socials, every single stat has a social skill. So just because you're the quote unquote, friendly charisma character, right, who has courtesy and enhearten, doesn't necessarily mean that you might be the best person. Maybe there's a tough dwarven general who doesn't take shit, and he doesn't want to hear your courteous platitudes, right? The chattering, endless, flowery words of elves and men. And so you go in there and, you sing a song or a poem or recite an edda of the courage of your line, of your people. And maybe because of the bonus dice that the GM gives you, that's actually the better option. If you can construct a situation where what I'm describing is true, you have begun to create a really cool and compelling social combat system. Because now the players are able to use their character sheets, but they're also able to use the knowledge that they have about the world, and they have the knowledge of the world of the NPCs, okay? That, Jake, that's role-playing. Now, that doesn't mean I expect for you to actually speak an epic poem of the lineage of your people, your people of Dale. But if you can do that, then that's where it's really, really powerful. And I think that's where you can get to a really cool place where it's like, awesome. We feel like we are able to not only use the mechanics on our sheet, but we're also able to use our knowledge of this NPC, of these situations, and use that to our advantage. That feels like actually playing a game, not just pick the best, who's got the highest skill, roll it, fingers crossed, hope for the best. So this game gives us a lot of tools. It gives us 6 different skill sets, or 6 different social skills, 2 for each different attribute. We have bonus dice, bonus success dice. We have bonus penalty dice. We have bonus success dice. We have penalty success dice. We have favored and ill-favored, okay, where you basically roll with advantage or roll with disadvantage. There's even a situation where a character could become inspired. Remember, when normally your character can spend a hope to gain a bonus D6. But if your character in this situation is inspired, your character gains bonus 2D6 when they spend a hope. And lastly, you have items. And let's see what we have here. You have useful items, okay? So remember, your character has these items, and they are associated with a skill, but they are not universally useful. For example, you might have a coil of rope with a grappling hook to climb, and that's going to be potentially useful in athletics. And if it is, you get a bonus D6. But obviously, if your character is, crossing a rickety bridge or trying to jump a ravine, the coil of rope is not going to help that athletics check, okay? On the other hand, right, if you put on your evening wear before you go and meet with Lord Elrond, or before you go and meet with some, elven lord, that could absolutely help maybe your courtesy roll. But maybe the GM says that's not going to help against the dwarf. But if you bring out your bottle of liquor as you try to basically commiserate with the dwarves and, pass the bottle around, that might absolutely work. So again, it's a way of using the mechanics of the game and also using the fiction of the game that can make it feel really cool and compelling. So I definitely think this game has the pieces to make this an interesting process, but you do have to be willing to actually use them and actually work at it a little bit. All right. And again, if you put, 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 2 together, suddenly you might end up in a situation where you're rolling with a shitload of bonus dice, and your character is going to be able to make a really good first impression and really set up your company for success. Okay. So then we go into the interaction. This is the main and most challenging part of a social gathering, whether it's a birthday party to an official audience with a lord or a lady. They make skill rolls to accumulate successes and try to match or exceed the resistance rating of the council. The players choose their own course of action as they see fit, but their skill rolls can be modified by the attitude of the people they encounter. To this end, the lore master should decide whether the audience that the players are interacting with is reluctant, open, or friendly. So lose a die, no modifier, gain a die. So now we've introduced another way that we can introduce bonuses and penalties, right? Who are you talking to in this council? What are their opinions towards you? How do they feel about you? All right. During this stage, you keep track of the total number of successes rolled by the company. Each Tengwar rune icon counts as an additional success. So when you're rolling all those D6s, if you get a success, cool, that's 1. But if you get bonus 6s, then you get, for each bonus 6 that you get an additional success. That's how you can get to something like 9. And again, we've got a cool list here of how you might use a bunch of different skills. Enhearten, insight, persuade, riddle, song, the like and the like and the like. Now, here we have a sidebar on awarding effective role-playing. And you know what? The book seems to be saying exactly what Beowulf and I've been saying, which is the players and the role lore master may ask themselves about how much impact the interaction between them should have on the final outcome of a council. Should a good die roll be considered more important than a clever decision by a player? The right answer is to give both equal weight. As happens with any action that implies the possibility of failure, players during a council describe their conduct, an appropriate skill roll is made to evaluate the result. And I think that for me, this line is sort of at the heart of role-playing games. As a GM, one of the reasons I play role-playing games is because I don't want to decide. I want the dice to decide. I want the game to do what the game is here to do. It's not a book. If it was a book and I was writing it, if it was a movie and I was writing the screenplay, I could be like, this is exactly what I want to have happen. And put that into my book. I could have whatever I want happen. That thing that I strongly want to have happen. There are many times when I'm playing a role-playing game, especially when I'm the game master, and I think this is so awesome. It would be so cool if, and I have to stop myself. I have to control myself because that's not what I'm here to do. If I'm here to do that, I should go write a novel or I should go write a screenplay. I'm here because we are confronted with a situation where an action implies the possibility of failure. And I owe it to the undiscovered country that is our emerging collaborative narrative to give that possibility its fair due, to let the dice truly shape what is happening here, no matter how much I want to have this thing happen. And, Jake, I think also hits upon a really great point here as well. Should a good die roll be considered more important than a clever decision? Note, it didn't say great performance. It didn't say, incredible, voice. It says clever decision. What are you doing, right? what's the point of your argument? What are you talking about? Right? This basically, are you just describing something cool, or are you actually moving to flank? Right? And so that's what really is at work here. So if the delivered speech touches topics that are relevant to your goal and important to the audience, the lore master can allow the players to gain 1 dice or even 2 dice to their skill roll. And so what this really is touching on is, hey, what are you convincing them with? What are your topics? What are you using to deliver your point? If those are good points that matter to your goal and happen to be viewed importantly by your audience, then you could potentially be sitting here at a situation where you gain 2 bonus dice. Note that if you talk to the right people who are friendly, you're gaining 1 dice. If you make some great points that really touch in on those characters' motives, their concerns, you could get a bonus 2 dice. That's 3 dice right there. And part of this bonus is choosing the right skill, right? Because if the character chooses the wrong skill, I might not allow you to get this bonus dice because I don't care, because what you're saying is being filtered through the lens of what skill you're using, right? A character might, the point you might be trying to make is, if you don't help us, the orcs are going to destroy, your village. If you don't help us, the orcs are going to destroy your homes. That's your point. But there's a lot of different ways to make that point. You could make that point through an enhearten. You could make that point through a persuasion. You could make that point through a song. You could make that point through an awe roll, right? So how you describe it and how you couch that role is going to make a big difference. And in this game, where do you have to choose what skill you want to filter through? Keith, I think there's there's kind of an overlap there. Torchbearer would say, you, the player, describe your character's action, and the GM picks the skill that matches with what your action was. That is the official Torchbearer approach. Some people feel that is very heavy-handed. But I will say that if your character has a really, really, really high enhearten skill, and you go, all right, I'm going to get in their face and I'm going to scream at them, they do not come here to destroy Gondor's crops. They come here to destroy its people. Okay, that's not very enheartening, And, there's lessons to be learned from every role-playing game. And I think that there is one of the cool, unique elements. I don't think we should ignore the mechanics in role-playing games. I think there are games. I think the mechanics are important. But like the great Mike Underwood said in one of his first Daggerheart streams, he views the tapestry that is the collaborative story that we are writing as being made of 2 pieces of fabric that are being woven together by the actions of the players. One of those pieces of fabric is the fiction, and one of those pieces of fabric are the mechanics. And so this needle starts by intersecting with the fiction. It then passes into the mechanics. The mechanics then feed back into the fiction. Then it passes back into the fiction, into the, back into the mechanics, and back and forth and back and forth. And as we take actions, which represents the needle, we are weaving together the fiction and the mechanics into a whole ass new thing. And that was a thing that we had in Discord. There was, it's the Dylan, you son of a bitch. It's the, Carl Weathers and Arnold Schwarzenegger, black guy, white guy, fist grab. And we had like fiction, mechanics, and then it was like whole ass new thing. And it's an incredible analogy because in my opinion, it gets at the very heart of what makes role-playing games unique. isn't just about the fiction. It isn't just about the mechanics. Now, I will say that Daggerheart is a fiction-first game. Well, what does that mean? Well, quite literally, what it means, if you're thinking about your needle and thread analogy, is that the first piece of fabric that we start with is the fiction. So we start with the fiction, but then we go to the mechanics. And then the mechanics have their effect and then reinform the fiction. And then we go back to the fiction to make our decision. A mechanics-first game, I think, still should respect the fiction. It's just that we start with the mechanics. And what happens mechanically then informs the fiction, right? And that's the only difference between mechanics first and fiction first. In the case of a game of the One Ring, it is my most fervent hope that this game would be treated in mostly a fiction-first manner. I ideally would want players to be thinking in terms of, they don't have to give their speech at the Council of Elrond, but I do want them to be thinking about in terms of like, what point am I making? How am I making it? What's my personality? What are my actions? And then as a group, we can kind of say like, oh, it sounds like you're trying to persuade them. And you're like, no, I was kind of trying to enhearten them. And I might go, okay, like maybe soften your approach a little bit. Maybe maybe touch a little bit more on the personal aspects. And so we can kind of restructure the physics. I'm not trying to fuck somebody over. If somebody wants to make an enhearten roll, that's fine, but we should make sure that we start in the fictions with them making an enhearten roll. We don't have to make it so draconian where we're like, no, you did not meet my criteria to make an enhearten roll. I am going to force you to make a persuasion roll. And you're like, well, I have 0 ranks in persuade, and actually I have a penalty to it. And you're like, okay, well, that's just a miscommunication. That's gotcha. Avoid gotchas, right? One of the things that Blades in the Dark teaches us is always be page setting, right? Make sure everybody's on the same page. Stop the game. It's not a live play. Even if it was, I do that all the time, even during a live play, right? It's not a live stream. It's not an actual play. Just stop. But what about my immersion? Fuck your immersion. This is a real game with real people who are trying to have a fun time. All right. Your single-minded obsession with, I don't want to disrupt the flow of the narrative in the role-playing, man, fucking sucks. That's how you lose players. That's how people check out, right? Respect people. Respect their time, respect their efforts. Full stop and say, hey, just so we're clear here, what angle are you going for? It's okay to talk about your game. It's okay to have table talk. That doesn't mean that your game isn't, people just hold themselves to this critical role standard. And I think the critical role standard is kind of bullshit anyways, because they're all just kind of fucking punting the rules half the time anyways, or Dimension 20 in BLM. Anyways, long story short, this is a great point to be made, because what we've just seen here is our character might have two dice in a skill. And by really focusing on critical goals and what the NPC's motives are and what sort of approaches might work best for them and what is their level of engagement, we might be able to gain as many as 3 bonus dice. We only started with 2. So we are getting more bonuses from our interaction with the fiction than we are from our mechanics. Now, our mechanics still matter. 5 dice is way better than 3 or 2. But my point is, we've combined it. And now it really feels like the choices and the actions that your characters are making matter. Now, there is a fundamental problem here, which as said, and now there's a couple fixes to this, which is the number of attempts that people can make is, X. Could be 3, it could be 4. But there is no limit to how many one person can make. In other words, your group might go, well, we're going to take the person who's really good at that one skill and we're going to spam that skill to the end of time. I would recommend 1 or 2 rules. 1. It's possible that you might start to penalize you might start to penalize the use of the same skill after a number of points, especially if they've succeeded. You might say, no, listen, you've definitely, won them over from an emotional point of view, but they still don't quite agree from a logistical point of view. And so there is no rule to rotate between players. No, not that I can see in the rules. Okay. So number one is to penalize players, penalize the use of the same skill over and over again, and do so through the course of the fiction. The second is to penalize a player if they go a bunch, right? Basically, it's like, we've heard from you. Has no one else have to say? What do the dwarves have to say on this matter? Now, to be clear, I like that it doesn't just rotate, because I don't think that that's accurate either. Because I have been in games where realistically, my character should just shut up. Maybe I help, right, with one skill roll. Maybe I spend a hope and I help somebody with one skill roll. But there are times and places in these games where it's appropriate and right that your character kind of takes a back seat. I'm okay with that. I'm totally fine with that. And in fact, I think it's artificial if you force somebody to, participate when they really shouldn't. Now, again, we're used to combat where everybody has to make a combative character. But the truth of the matter is, back in the original version of D&D, there was only really one, maybe two combative characters. Fighters, and maybe clerics. Wizards, magic users, thieves, they had D4 hit points and basically no armor. So you might say, oh, yeah, but thieves have sneak attack. No, they didn't. They had backstab. And let me tell you something. Backstab was very different than sneak attack. It was not even close to sneak attack. Thieves and wizards sucked at fighting. They were terrible at it. In fact, the kind of core presumption is that those characters probably mostly just tried to stay out of the way, right? And leave the fighting to the fighter. But again, we're used to this mindset of, well, everybody gets to participate at every single point and every single time of the game. A thief thing might be like, you stay out of the fight until the very end when you leap from the shadows and backstab somebody and hope that they die. And then that's it. That was your contribution for the whole fight, was like one attack. Wizards didn't have enough spells. They didn't have cantrips. They didn't have at-will cantrips. I cast Electric Arc every round. Oh, I've got 6 first-level spells and 6 second-level spells and 6 third-level spells, and I've got a bunch of, scrolls, and we're just going to long rest after this fight anyway, so I'm going to go fireball, 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 fireball. I mean, in original D&D, Wizards didn't even have access to crossbows, so they didn't even have that. Now, to be clear, I also completely agree with Commander Snookums. You do not want it to be every time X out of combat problem comes up, everyone takes 5 while the GM and the skill monkey have a 30 to 90 minute solo adventure. You are 100% correct. So that's why I'm saying it's one thing for you to say, hey, look, I built a surly, bad-mouthed, foul-mouthed dwarf who is an absolute combat monster and also knows his way around a campfire like nobody's business. I've basically made that dwarf from that anime that Bob made me watch, or that my patrons made me watch. Why can't I remember his name? The anime was Delicious in Dungeon, but there's a dwarf. Great at fighting, great at camping and cooking. Was terrible at social interactions, right? And that's okay. You've made that decision. Now, in most games, it is a really shitty trade-off to be really good at social encounters and really bad at combat encounters, because you're going to have 95 combat encounters and you're going to have 5 social encounters. But again, in this game, I think you're going to see more of a balance. And so it's a fine decision to say that, hey, look, if I took an action, I would only be fucking the group over. And it's not cool that I have to do that. And we shouldn't have to force everybody to be good at socialization. All I'm simply saying is I would also go out of my way to make sure that just one person didn't monopolize every single council. Okay. Now, Beowulf made a point, and I said, saying fuck your immersion is fine, but if the group is not there for immersion. But if immersion is what the group is after, then fuck your immersion is actually what is BS. No, I think fuck your immersion is always appropriate. If it means level setting, page setting, and getting everybody on the same page. You fuck your immersion, fuck your game, fuck your simulation, fuck whatever thing you're doing, whatever thing that you're really into, fuck it. Because making sure that the human beings at your table are all comfortable and on the same page is more important than anything else that we're doing. So, sure. I mean, you could give somebody a turn and their turn could be passed. Yeah, Phil. I mean, as a G, I promise you as a GM, I would definitely be, doing a little bit of spotlight management here and saying, like, does anybody else have something that can contribute? Does anybody else want to contribute? Is there something else that you can contribute, And again, up to and including the point where I go, the elven lord seems to be, growing a bit impatient with the endless prattling of the human, And I might say, if you make another check, I'm going to start penalizing you. They're kind of getting sick of you. They're like, oh my God, another stream, Derek. Okay. So the nice thing about this is it has a defined time limit, right? Realistically, you're going to have 3 to 4 attempts, maybe 5 to 6 if you roll really well. So we're only talking about 3 or 4 or 5 skill checks. And that's not too bad. I mean, if you have a session 0 where one of your session 0 things is, hey, all of us being on the same page and taking time to make sure that we're all, understanding and cool with what's going on. If that's something that you all vote to remove from your game, that's pretty fucked up. So is this just a 4E skill challenge? No. The reason is because, number one, 4E skill challenges didn't have a time limit. 4E skill challenges worked until you got X successes before Y failures. That's not how this works. The problem with a 4E skill challenge is you basically, there is no set time limit. There's no pressure. There's no, impetus to get the job done. And because you need to get successes before failure, you are really penalized if you let somebody who's bad attempt the skill, because as long as you let someone who's good attempting the skill, they basically can never not succeed. So that's the main reason why 4E skill challenges were flawed, is because they didn't have any sort of inherent limit. No, it's not a real world time limit. It's just how many checks you get to make. Pass or fail, your spokesperson will make an initial check to sort of introduce the group. Then, depending on the result of that check, that's how many checks your group has available to them. Now, this is also where I would want to steal from Draw Steal. We covered negotiations in that stream. I thought they were really, really cool. And one of the things that you can have for an NPC is something that, for example, maybe penalizes the group with they lose an attempt, or maybe they can do something that gives them a bonus attempt, or maybe that attempt was free, right? Like if you know that the NPC, right, absolutely, does not want to be reminded of, the fact that the elves failed to, the elves failed to contain Sauron or whatever. Then if a player brings that up, you might say, hey, that is actually going to penalize you with 2 attempts, because it's almost like their patience is running out because you've kind of said the bad word. Whereas if you say something that the person really wants to hear, maybe it doesn't even count as one of the attempts, because they're like, yeah, hey, like that you're saying what I want to hear. So there's a lot of little levers here that you can play around with and mess with, that can hopefully get your players sort of onto the same page. So after 3, 4, 5 attempts, your group will have a number of successes. Now remember, their initial attempt is going to set whether they needed 3 or 6 or 9. So then after those 5 attempts are over, or 4 attempts are over, we look at it. If they reach the number of goals, then they have achieved what their objective was. Simple. However, if they got some successful rolls, but they didn't meet or beat the rating within the time limit, the player heroes can now simply choose to fail and be refused for what they asked for, or with the approval of the lore master, they can opt to achieve their stated goal, but at a price. For example, they gain from the council much less what they asked for, or they end up acquiring one or more enemies from among the audiences. I gotta ban somebody. All right. The price doesn't need to be immediately apparent and may lead to unexpected challenges the other day. Now, this is sort of torchbearer concessions 101, because I'll tell you this much. If the group needed, let's say, 6 successes, right, from our initial attempt. Come on, PDF, I believe in you. Right? It's a bold request, right? They need 6 successes in the time limit offered. Let's say the players got 5. Okay? They did not succeed. They got 5. But I'll promise you that if I do offer them a sort of success with woe, that it's going to be very, very, very favorable. On the other hand, if the group got 2 successes when they needed 6, then I'm much more likely to either say it was failure or say, okay, they will help you, but at a much, much steeper cost, right? So you can make the players feel that, hey, we didn't succeed, but we got so close, and that mattered, right? Because we kind of had to settle. It was, kind of a concession that we had to make. And so, there's this idea of the margin of failure. Exactly, Jake. And I think that they definitely could have put something in there, and I think that would be really, really good advice. Lastly, if they fail all of their available rolls or score some successful rolls but fail to meet the resistance after a botched introduction, then it's a disaster. And potentially the players may end up imprisoned or attacked. You've come in here and assaulted. Absolutely, Dr. Metropolis. And this is why I say the fiction should influence the mechanics and the mechanics should influence the fiction. You see, part of the problem with the way that people play role-playing games is they don't let the mechanics, they don't let what is happening in the game change or influence in their mind or in their expression of the game what is happening. Right? And that's your problem. That's a PC problem. If the players are failing all of these roles, and in their mind they're like, oh, we're being super courteous and we're being super nice, and the elves are just being dicks. Well, no. Look at what the dice are telling you. It's your fault as a player for just playing badly. The dice are telling you you are not being polite. Or maybe you are being polite, but you're saying all the wrong things. And I think it's fun. I think it's your job as a player, and I think it's part of the challenge. When people talk about the challenge, this is for me the challenge of role-playing. Okay, what did I really say? Or me going, okay, guys, we're we're fucking this up pretty bad, right? And so this is where it's like you lean into it and you go, hey, listen here, buddy. I didn't just walk, 100 leagues, okay, to be told no. How dare you, So it's this idea of, again, start with the fiction, go into the mechanics, go back to the fiction. So I think that is, what's really cool, because, I need to take my cues from what's going on in the current situation, right? If we have one check left and we haven't scored any successes, then very clearly this is going badly. In fact, at this point, you should know as a player that you can't actually win. So part of the fun of the role-playing game is to go, okay, we've not handled this well, in the sense that like the dice have not gone our way, or we made bad decisions, or both. Maybe we made great decisions and the dice didn't just go our way. Cool. Let's figure out what that means in the fiction, And yeah, it can be fine to describe your approach, make the roll, and then if you really want to, act out the dialogue and play into it and use the results as sort of the thing that guides your dialogue, I think that's totally fine, But it's like hit points, right? Hit points, you have 100 hit points. At 1 hit point, at 50 hit points, at 100 hit points, your character is exactly the same, right? Mechanically, your character is exactly the same in D&D. So from that perspective, you could be sitting there talking at 1 hit point, and you could be describing your character as being like, they are the pinnacle of health. They are completely fine. They are totally in the best health of their life. And then like a rusty nail scratches you for a hit point, and suddenly you're unconscious and dying. And you could be like, that doesn't make any sense. That feels very disconnected from the fiction that I was just presenting. And that's because at 1 hit point, mechanically, your character is fine. You don't get any sort of penalties. But the reality of the situation is you could get scratched by a cat and now your character is dying. So the problem is that your perception of what your character is at 1 hit point was flawed, because the mechanics are going to smack you in the face really, really hard. When you step on a twig, it does a point of damage to you, and now your character is unconscious and bleeding to death. And that is going to be very incongruent with your vision of the fiction of your character being completely fine. And of course, that's going to be a problem, because that doesn't make any sense. What do you mean? I was completely fine. A cat scratched me and now I'm dying? What do you mean? Well, the problem is when you were at 1 hit point, your character was in really bad shape. And this fight was going, or this situation was going really badly. And you just refused to acknowledge that in the fictional representation of your character. So when you're in one of these councils and your characters have accumulated 1 success out of 9 needed, and you're going into like the last 1 or 2 attempts, the problem is that fictionally, you should be presenting this as, this is going very badly. We are almost certainly not going to win this. And we should be reflecting that in our representation of the fiction, both as a game master and as a player. Yes, Omniscient Toad. I mean, clearly, this is the classic example of this is the dwarves being imprisoned by the elves, by the Mirkwood elves and King Thranduil in The Hobbit, right? Attacked, imprisoned. Attack doesn't necessarily mean they draw steel upon you, right? They could chase you out or whatever. Now, Commander Snookum says, having a hard time understanding your point. Can you give a specific example of role-playing off of being RNG screwed that was fun? Any of the instances. For me, let me rephrase it. Role-playing off of being RNG screwed will never be fun if you are playing role-playing games to win. Because what I'm asking you to do is embrace the suck and have fun with the fact that your character is failing. if you do not want to have fun failing, or you do not have fun failing, I think that role-playing games are a bad choice, personally. Or you need to play a game where you basically can't fail, or you need to play with a GM who fudges. All of those things solve that issue. You know, it's for me. I mean, I love the game giving me permission to go in a completely wild and crazy direction and being basically given new notes from the screenwriter. You see, there's a common mistake, in my opinion, that the screenwriter is the dungeon master. It's not. The screenwriter of your movie is the dice. And my job as a player is to be, you know, portray my character, the script that I'm given. And I'm playing my character, and all of a sudden the screenwriter comes in with a last-minute rewrite, and it says, "Hey, you're a total dick in this scene." And it's my job as an actor to be like, okay, why is my character being a dick? What has happened in this scene that would suddenly motivate my character to become very obnoxious and very challenging and very difficult to work with? Find your motivation and then, you know, play from that. I think that's the challenge. That, to me, is the challenge of role-playing. So Jordan says, when I was compromised in Legend of the Five Rings, which basically means that his character had acquired enough strife that their character was basically on the verge of having an emotional breakdown, which as a samurai is a big deal. I rolled poorly, and I had my high-status doji, which is a very, very, like, they're all about courtesy, they're all about politeness, severely insult a samurai who had been peasant-born. 12-point honor loss, amazing character moment. We had a kind of a similar situation, sort of the reverse, Jordan, where we had a group of lion who had come to Otosan Uchi in order to try to get information from a high-ranking doji, crane, diplomat, and they ended up basically insulting her, and they were trying to beat a hasty retreat out of the city, but before they could leave, they were confronted by a group of crane samurai on the street who basically started hurling insults. And I knew, my primary player, Aaron, knew that a fight here was bad decision. It was a bad decision from a mechanical perspective. It was a bad decision from their mission perspective. It was a bad decision from what their daimyo had told them to do. They weren't here to get into a fight with the crane. They were here to get information from the crane. But what I wanted to do as a GM is I wanted to challenge the player, and I wanted to see, would he let his honor be directly challenged? And as a lion character in Legend of the Five Rings, your honor is the most important thing. And also, fights can be very, very dangerous and very deadly. And I wanted to see if he was going to figure out a way to get out of the fight.
DR Metropolis tipped $3.
And he said, no.
Good tangent. It comes down to what you enjoy. There are storyteller games. And I'm a big war gamer too. I tend to not enjoy failure via randomization, so I can relate to not enjoying failing. I don't like feeling incompetent.
Dr. Metropolis, thank you for the tip. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's different games. I mean, we you know, look at a game like Daggerheart, right? Where if your character dies, you can just say, "Hey, I just, you know, I avoid avoid death." But I don't. So there's a difference, right, between failing and losing. And I think that's the thing that I think is important. And just because you failed doesn't mean that your character was incompetent. I mean, if you watch most of your favorite movies, even like your superhero movies, the characters fail like 90% of the time. They don't achieve their goal. New complications arise. That's why there has to keep being more scenes for the movie to continue. But I don't think you would ever look at that character and say, wow, that character sucks. Wow, that character is incompetent. You know, but again, if you watch a movie like, Captain America or Iron Man, most of the movie, Die Hard, he is failing almost every point of that movie because he's not finished. He has not accomplished his goal until the end. But you would never say that John McClane was incompetent in any of those scenes. So, yeah, he's failing forward, yes, but he is failing. And that's the important part. Now, what he's not doing is he's not losing. So, again, I don't think failure has to mean incompetence. And I also don't think failing has to mean that our story is over, right? Like if we go into this council and the group fails, okay, and then I go, and I put my screen up and I start packing up my books and everyone goes, wait, what's going on? I go, oh, you guys lost. That's game over. Sorry. And they're like, what? And I'm like, well, my game, the narrative, the game has no other possible way to move forward from this scene other than you guys succeeding at this council. You guys failed at this council, ergo you lose and the game is over. So now what's funny about that is we are very used to playing those games. That's what most people play. That's called almost every single role-playing game where every fight is if you fail here, you lose because it's a TPK. And TPKs usually spell the end of a campaign. Because even if you somehow, the GM pulls something out of their ass and, oh no, you wake up and everybody's fine. It really ruins the vibe. I think it harshes the vibe and it kind of calls bullshit on the whole game. So yeah, it's definitely a case where, no, I know you're not on an I never want to fail soapbox here. You just said failing isn't fun. I mean, that's fine. I'm just saying, I think failure can be fun because again, that's what drives drama. D&D, particularly combat focused D&D, is very much the complete opposite of almost every single book or movie that you've seen. When you watch a movie or you read a book, it is usually an instance of the characters continually failing until the final scene where they win. In D&D, it is usually a nonstop stream of your character winning, and then at the end they win even more. So now my hope with this situation is for you to get a disaster, you literally have to roll 0 successes. You okay? You have to fail all of your available rolls. Okay? Now, to succeed, you have to get full value, but I imagine a lot of time you're going to get failure or success with woe. You're going to get a compromised position. They're going to agree to your terms if you agree to theirs, which is how most negotiations work, right? So what's up, Agile Monk? You know that, buddy. One Ring's great. Sorry, I didn't get to get on. I didn't get to hop on RFC today. Hopefully you guys didn't miss me too much. Right, but Dr. Metropolis, I mean, I would imagine that most of the time you're going to get failure or success with woe. So what do I think of these conflict rules? Well, or council rules. I like them. I do think that we should add in other elements that we have learned from other games. I think that, this sidebar here is really important and we should embrace this. I think using the skills is good to embrace. I imagine that with the entire council only being somewhere between, say, 3 to 5 total checks, a council should happen in a relatively short amount of time. I imagine you could play through this scene, within 15 minutes, unless you're doing excessive amounts of fluffy bullshit time and in-character discussion and all this other stuff. which you may want to do if your group really wants to chew the fat. By all means, go for it. But I think that between setting the resistance, which relates to the player's ultimate decision, to choosing an introduction and using different skills, and then using the series of skills and points to either reluctant, open, or friendly audience members, making sure that if you make good decisions that are, touching on topics that are relevant to your goal and deemed important by the audience, getting bonus dice, then I think we end up in a really, really good place where the players are able to influence the outcome of the scene, but also with their characters. What if I'm bad at chatting? No, Dr. Metropolis, you don't go round robin here. In fact, I said, as I said before, you could technically have one player make all of the checks. And I am simply saying that I, as the game master, would probably either encourage the players through a penalty if they continue to use the same person. But I also think it's totally fine for, let the elf lord person go. Because again, this is a game where, any of these scenes may, they really try to present it as all three of these things are equal. It's usually not the case. In almost every single game, combat is the primary way that you are going to resolve conflict in the game. Full stop. But in this game, they talk about that you might have a combat every other session. So it is entirely possible that your character may not really be that great at combat, and you might be really good at journeying. I would highly recommend, as a matter of function, that your character be good at 2 of the 3 scenes, 2 of the 3 types. If you're good at journeys, be good at journeys in combat, or be good at journeys and councils, or be good at councils in combat. But if you're only good at one thing, you might find yourself feeling like a little bit, like a fifth wheel some of the time. So yeah, I think this is pretty good. I think we should take some advice from Draw Steel. I think we should take some advice from Legend of the Five Rings. I think there's some cool stuff some cool tech that we can definitely use, and it's hinted at here. It's hinted at here, but yeah, I think this seems fine. It'll be to the point, and it's time limit, and there's some cool elements here for your character, for your players to make decisions that influence the mechanics, but it also relies on the mechanics. Also, just like Legend of the Five Rings, the fact that your character isn't automatically priced out of a social scene just because they don't have a high charisma. Number one, there is no charisma stat. And number two, every stat has a variety of socially related skills, right? We saw with strength, you have awe and song and maybe awareness. In heart, you have enhearten and insight and courtesy. And in wits, we have persuade and riddle, possibly lore or scan. So, no matter what, quote unquote, your character build is, there's room and a place for you to potentially be good at a number of skills. I should also point out that there might be a reason why your character is really good at this skill anyways. The awe skill is used in combat when your character is in the aggressive stance, the forward offensive stance. They use that one to basically like intimidating shout the enemies. So, you might be really good at that thing anyways. Even as a quote unquote combative character, which is really cool because then it gets to do double duty. He said duty. All right. So yeah, I'm going to give the council. Yes, enhearten is also used in combat, right? For the rally maneuver. All in all, I'm going to give the council rules a B. I don't think they're perfect. I don't think they're like the best I've ever read. I don't think anything is really the best I've ever read. Because while I do like Legend of the Five Rings, it is a little bit convoluted because Legend of the Five Rings is a little bit convoluted. But they're very solid, and I'm going to give them a B. I think with some tweaks, and I think bringing in some extra tech and really being mindful of some of the hidden and sort of implicit lessons, I think it could do really well. Right. Perry and Pippin and Merry were not really, great in combat, but they weren't really in the party for that, right? One could argue that Pippin and Merry were kind of like NPCs in a certain capacity, but yeah, right, exactly. And that is definitely my inclination as well, Jake. If the same person is using the same skill and they're using it over and over again, there's definitely going to be diminishing returns for sure. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. In fact, that's how I, quote unquote, role play 99% of the time. So the last part of a game. Now I remember the first time I read The Hobbit, and I also remember the first time I read Fellowship of the Ring, particularly The Two Towers. And I was a young lad, and I loved The Hobbit. And there are passages from The Hobbit that have stayed with me for a very long time. And a lot of them have to do with traveling. So there's this is a very fraught mechanic. And you need to be careful with it. Last year, 2024, we played a Forbidden Lands campaign, which involved a copious amount of travel. But it wasn't particularly interesting. And most of the roles were made by one character, the character who had the best survival skill. And I've said before, but I believe this still to be true. The number one problem with most hex crawls, as people call them, which I think is a terrible name, is actually the same problem that I think is wrong with dungeon crawls, which is, while it might be fine in a video game or a MMO, which I guess is also a video game, the TLDR is it's really, really hard to make randomly wandering around a map in a TTRPG fun. There's this idea that it could be fun. I've tried very hard, 33 years of role-playing games. It is, I don't want to say impossible, but it's if you find a success, you let me know. You can have the channel for night and you can teach me, because again, I've been trying to do it for 33 years. And this, Dr. Metropolis says, yeah, this ain't Skyrim. So let me put this into comparison. I don't play it anymore, but I used to play MMOs back in the day. So I played EverQuest, the first EverQuest. I played EverQuest 2, and then I played World of Warcraft for a number of years. I think I quit after like the third expansion. But in that game, I absolutely loved going into a new zone and just looking around, and filling in my mini map and being like, oh, cool. What's this cool circle, ring of runes, what's this stone? What's this ring of henges? And, oh, look, there's some cool ogres over there. And, oh, look, a cool quest hub. And, I just liked exploring. And that could be it's fun. It could be very exciting, and especially in these overworld survival games, just basically randomly walking around and seeing what happens. And I would love to tell you that I think that TTRPGs can handle this well. People go, oh, I have a random encounter table. I have a random hex table. I have everything I need. In my experience, this does not, work well. And I think David Heron said it very well. There's a difference between travel and exploring, right? There's a difference between journeying and exploring. And they're not the same thing. And so Mr. Heron is spot on with the money. And Mark Lore says, well, you might like this journey system then, because it's not about randomly wandering. And I think that is, number one, good. And number two, appropriate. I don't think that the One Ring as a thematic entity of a game is one in which we just have the characters, you know, roaming the Badlands looking for loot, you know? That just doesn't seem like the sort of epic adventure that our player heroes, are going to be doing, or the sort of important quests that our characters are going to be going on. So that is probably for the best. And I'll also say that it just tends to work a lot better. Now, this is like a side tangent, but when people play in dungeons, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they play a dungeon is they just say, okay, player, here's a dungeon, go. And they don't give any sort of context or hint about where there might be treasure, or where there might be a magical fountain, or where there might be a legendary monster. You need to give that dungeon map. You need to give that wilderness map texture, right? Because without texture, the players are just going to, wander around randomly and hope something interesting happens. Instead, it's way more interesting, I think, to say, hey, look, you're here on the blank map. There's something really interesting right here. Now, you may not know what's between here and there, and your inclination might be to go in a straight line, and maybe that's totally fine until, you're crossing and you get to a mountain range or a river. Do you go over the mountains? Do you try to go around them? That's fine, but you're still making decisions based off of, fundamentally, a goal. Now, I've shown this before, so pardon me, but when we played Forbidden Lands, and this worked pretty well. It wasn't perfect. But when we played Forbidden Lands, the way that I ran the game was that it was a hex crawl. But as you can see, this is the map that my players saw. The entire Forbidden Lands was visible. Okay, it was in black and white. It didn't have all of the little details like the names of places or where certain critical locations were. But they could look at this map and go, oh, cool, there's a lake over here to the west. Maybe we should follow the river and go explore the lake. Or they might say, wow, cool, there's a really awesome mountain range right in the middle of this giant forest. I wonder what's there. Oh, I bet there's something cool there. We should go explore that. And this gave them the sort of direction that they needed. Now, of course, as they explored, right, they would, and of course, also too, like you could see that, out here, there is no hexes, right? It's all just black and white and unknown. And then as they start to fill in the map, they start to see the hexes, they start to see locations like Weatherstone and the Hollows. And this actually was their stronghold, which they built here at the intersection of these three rivers called Halvard's Ferry. This was they started filling all this stuff in. And believe it or not, this isn't actually that long of a distance, but this took us like 13, 14 sessions of play to fill in. But one thing that could work really well too was like you might give the player, like for example, from information that they gained, I revealed, this temple or this shrine that was out on this island in the middle of the bay. Now they had never been there, but they heard from good authority or they found it on a map. And so I revealed it on their hex crawl map. And so even though they had never been there, they were like, oh, like maybe that's a place where we should try to get to. Maybe we should make our way to this village or town, and maybe we can acquire a boat, and maybe we can go out here and explore that. So like you can use this as a way to like really, really, entice the players. Like for example, maybe I think there's something around here. I don't know. There it is. Okay. Maybe you go, hey, you hear about a rumor about an ancient wizard's tower on the shores of Lake Clay. Maybe they find a map in an ancient treasure trove, and you reveal these 2 hexes to them. Now, in this case, the party had explored fairly far west, so, you can see, this. And they might go, how do we get there? Like, oh, we'll follow the river until it falls into the lake, and we'll go explore this tower. This is really interesting. And what you do is if the party is right here in the middle of your map, that's actually not the party. This is actually the party. This is the party icon. If the party icon is right here, and you have all these really cool locations, built out all over the map, then the party's like, man, where do we go? Do we go over here? Do we go to here? Do we try to get up to here? Do we explore, do we go explore, look at this dungeon that we never explored right here? What is there anything in this little crop of woods by the river? We know that this river is the mellow water. Is there something here at the entrance of the river to the ocean? Maybe. I don't know. We should go explore there. So, if this was all just a blank gray map, you would have none of that texture, right? And I think that's what's really interesting. So I see a lot of text here. Derek says, you got lost. Spend more rations of which you already have too many. Not interesting. Correct, Derek. I mean, this is the fundamental problem with certain hex crawling rules is like, it's not really punishing, but it's also not really rewarding. It's just kind of feels like you're wasting time here, And I agree with David. If you're just using a random hex table, you've run into an issue. And Todd says, when I was a kid 40 years ago, random tables were cool. Now they seem silly. I still think random tables can be cool, but they need to be a supplement to something that is, already existent in there. What program is this? This is Foundry VTT. This is the official, Forbidden Lands module. You can buy it from Free League. It's like $20 or something like that. Keith says I'm a good GM. Well, thank you, Keith. Derek is just cool. Thank you. Knight's Last Call. Did you use a second image without the details as a top layer? I did that. I did do that. Who made that map version? Me. I made it in Photoshop. It was actually a lot easier than you think it was. But yeah, it uses, if we go here, configure. So it uses a module called World Explorer. Let me see if I can set this up. So when you install the module World Explorer, I don't know if you can see this. It gives you a new tab in the scene. And you can see that it gives you this overlay image, and that overlays this image on top of the main background image. And then what you can do is you can change the color, you can change the distance, you can change how far the grid is exposed, you can turn off fog of war or not. This is a really cool module for Foundry if you're doing this kind of thing, which is called World Explorer. I highly recommend getting it. I highly recommend playing around with it. Yep, I just removed the original details from the map. Rokusai, 100%. I just used Healing Brush and Clone Stamp Brush in Photoshop. And then obviously I just applied a black and white filter to it. So basically on the original map, this tower is there. And so then what I did is I just clone stamped it and basically hit it. And the fact that it's in black and white also helps, cover it up so that it goes away. And this is a lot of fun. And for me personally too, I liked the idea. I liked that the hex grid was only visible where they had been. I feel like, because this made it feel more like, hey, we've gotten experience with this. We understand this, and we can do this stuff. And plus it lets you do really fun stuff. Like our druid had the ability to cast a spell that let him share his vision with a bird or something like that, or he could like, you know, almost like warg or like cast his mind into the vision of a bird. And the very first adventure that they did was trying to locate, they knew that somewhere out in the plains of Margelda was a temple of, you know, that they were trying to find this great ruby and this great gem. And I think their characters, I want to say they started here. I think they started right in these squares. And the very first dungeon they went to was this, the burial mound of Hrothgar Wolfsbane. And then they came up the river here because they followed the river. They got killed by bears, as I recall. Does it say anything? I thought this said like killed by bears or something. But eventually they decided to follow up on this rumor. Well, they were out in the middle of these hexes, and Aaron, the druid, cast that bird's eye view spell. And basically what I did, if you can imagine, I'll pretend here for a moment. Like, let's pretend that these were all hidden. Obviously the text wasn't there, but. So their party, right, had gotten to like this hex. And he kind of, you know, cast his, you know, or maybe they got to like, you know, this hex. And his druid cast this spell, which sort of cast his eye, you know, up into the sky. And so what I did is I came in here and I said, okay, cool. I'm going to reveal, you know, every hex adjacent to you, you know, with the help of your bird's eye view, you're able to basically see the areas around you. And then they were like, oh, cool. We now know where the temple is. We know where to go. And so, you know, they proceeded forward from there. So, it's pretty cool. Definitely a fun module. And it made it, anyways, my point is it made it a lot more fun. But what made it interesting was, or what made it way cooler was it would have been, you know, a lot, you know, more boring if it was just a flat gray map and there was no context to it. My hope is that looking at this black and white map and realizing that hidden within this map are all these little dungeons and towns and villages and towers makes them like, you know, kind of be like, oh, cool. You know, I want to go explore there. That's really cool. I want to go look and see what's there, you know? And so hopefully that encourages that behavior. Anyways, that was a tangent. I apologize. All right. So journey. So straight off the bat, we know that the book gives us a journey character log sheet. So clearly this game takes its journeying rules very, very seriously. In fact, you can, in theory, we talked a little bit about this, but presumably you would fill one of these out for every journey that your character's made. And then by the time you have played through, you know, 10 or 12 adventures, you would have like a little mini booklet of all of your journeys. So we can see here that on the log for our journey, we have the year, the season, where you started, where you went, how long the journey took. So some of this obviously you probably fill in as, you know, completes. Who was in the company? What was their role? How much fatigue they acquired? Now we talked about this before, but I want to remind this. One of the things that I actually thought was really interesting about this game is that as you journey, you acquire fatigue. Fatigue is not something that easily goes away. And this means that a long journey, which you are not prepared for, is going to wear you down pretty significantly. Your character will become weary, and that will have a significant impact on your ability to perform other actions. So it's not just like, hey, a bunch of shit happened to us. We got tore up by dire wolves and rampaging rivers, and we slept for one night. We're at full hit points. Okay, that's day 2. Meanwhile, on day 11 of the journey, we've been tracking through this endless swamp for almost 2 weeks. We just got attacked by we just got attacked by serpents, and someone almost died. All right, well, we sleep for a night and we wake up, we're at full hit points and everybody's fine, continue on our way. When you have that kind of recoverability in any kind of system, a journey literally just feels like a waste of time because there's no consequences, there's no penalty, there's no coming back to it, you know? So We've got space for the company, how much fatigue they acquired, space for your ponies and horses, which are important in a game if you're traveling, presumably. Looks like a field for maybe writing in some text, any notable events that occurred. And then there's even a little mini hex map for, I suppose, for you to draw the path that your journey ended up taking. Now, excuse me, in the beginning of the book, in the opening cover, we have this map, and at the back of the book, presumably, there is, or maybe they do know this, I don't know, there is a hex map. So, you know, if I was playing this, just FYI, if I was playing this on Foundry, I would totally set this map as my background map. And then if I was using World Explorer, I would overlay it with this map. And that way, when the players have an unexplored area, it would look like this. Okay. And then as they, you know, you would see, ooh, the hills of the dwarves and the mountains, and it's all kind of black and white and very Tolkien-esque, very not gamey at all. It looks like a real map. And then when they actually go to the hills of the dwarves and they start to fill it in, you would start to replace it with hexes and these color-coded spaces, which indicate the danger level of those spaces. So we can see over here that this dark color is impassable. The green is a borderland area. The sort of yellowy color is wild, and the orange color is a dark lands, which is another way of saying, you know, how dangerous that space is. Okay. Jordan says that's exactly how their Foundry is set up. Yeah. Keith, this is mental stress, right? No, this is fatigue. This is like physical weariness, Keith, I believe, is how fatigue is described in the game. So we'll take a look. So a company will often end up traveling across long leads of inhospitable and unfamiliar areas. Eriador is particularly set up for this because Eriador in the Third Age is fairly empty. You know, it's a ruined land. The great kingdoms that once were once here have long since fallen into shadow and ruin. Traveling heroes see the world outside their borders of their own lands, witness wondrous events, and face challenges that put their capabilities to the test. In short, a journey is synonymous with adventure. Gameplay during a journey is less focused on the details. Whenever possible, everyone involved should try to avoid explicitly referencing the rules and rather blend the structure into an ongoing narrative. I don't know that that's exactly right, because we are going to be using game rules here. What I would encourage, or how I would interpret this, is using that description that we were using before, right? Fiction, mechanics, and the player's actions are the needle and the thread. You should go back and forth between the two of them, right? You shouldn't be talking about the game in the context of, you know, freedom units and hexes, you know, but we use game mechanics so that we actually know what the fuck we're talking about. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I understand what they're trying to say here. They don't want it to just, you know, devolve into a, you know, boring coloring map session. You know, I could see where that happened really quickly. Applying the rules for Journey requires the use of the map of the traverse region and the collaboration between the lore master and the players to determine what happens along the way. The rules detailed in this chapter are best applied using a journey log, which we just looked at, a summary sheet used to keep track of the journeys. Experienced players may not consider it necessary, but they might consider using one, as a compiled journey works as a journal of sorts, compounding the companies of a company adventure. Cool. I completely agree. The rules for traveling in the One Ring assume that the company is trying to reach a specific destination. So there we go, right off the bat. This is not for randomly roaming the wilderness. If you're trying to go to a different number of different locations, each one should be considered a separate journey. As obvious it may seem, the members of a traveling company must know at least approximately where their destination is in order to reach it. The front end contains the player's map and represents the geographical lore of experienced adventurers. This is a deeper knowledge than is possessed by the average denizen of Eriador. So there you go. Just like my black and white map that I was showing from Forbidden Lands, the assumption is that while most common people probably know very little beyond, their immediate front door, as an experienced adventurer of Eriador, you possess a fairly broad, if not super specific, knowledge of what lies in the realm of Eriador. So you know that, to the west of the Shire are the Tower Hills, and there are the White Towers, including the White Tower of Olostrian. Now, you may not know 100% what's there, but you know essentially roughly where they are and that they exist. And that's enough for you to basically be able to kind of point your way. So I like that. Adventurers are a cut above, and also it makes the game practically playable. All of the locations indicated as villages or towns are places that they might choose as their destination. Not every settlement is shown on the map. Even a sparsely populated region contains dozens of unmarked villagers and isolated homesteads. Players can update their geographical lore during play by making a copy and writing directly onto it. There and back again. The rules for journey resolution have been devised to make traveling across the land a vital component of gameplay, but they are not meant to be used every time they are on the road. In particular, they should rarely be used when the heroes are on their way back home. I like this rule. This is because the main effects of adventuring on the player heroes are not very relevant if they're headed back for a safe haven where they can rest without problems, or if they are traveling without any concern for the amount of time it will take them to make the trip. In other words, yeah, you might have random encounters on the way back home. Yeah, you might become more fatigued on the way back home, but you're going to a place where you're going to rest up and heal to full anyway. So what difference does it make? And by that logic, you could see why the overland hex crawls in games like Pathfinder 2 and 5th edition make absolutely no sense, because basically every night is a safe haven, full recovery. So what was even the point of doing any of the journey and any of the adventures? On the contrary, the journey back should be played out in detail in those cases where an adventuring phase may profit from a closing act, or when reaching their destination was just part of the hero's mission. For example, if they're escorting someone back with them. So obviously, if the adventure is trying to get that person home, then you shouldn't just hand wave that. So use some of your common sense. But basically, if you're just going to heal to full when you get back to Rivendell anyways, what difference does it make? All right. They all assume a different role during the journey. This roughly summarizes what you will do. There is the guide, who's in charge of your route, your rest, and your supplies. There's the hunter, in charge of finding food, the lookout of the watch, and the scout, in charge of setting up camp and opening up new trails. A traveling company must cover all 4 roles. If there are more than 4 companies, more than one player can be assigned the same role. With the exception of the guide, there can only be one guide. But more than one hero can stand lookout for hunter or whatever. If you have less than 4 heroes, then one or more adventurers will have to take the multiple duties. Okay. So, if a journey is really long, more than 20 hexes, you should probably split it into a number of legs and do it as a series of multiple journeys, that'd be a pretty epic adventure. That might just be the whole adventure is just traveling. So we set the journey path, we make our marching roll, and we end the journey. Rokusai, why can there only be one guide? That's a bit odd. Well, Rokusai, the reason Forbidden Lands does this too, is because at the end of the day, only one person is telling you where you should go, go. Right? I mean, there can only be one captain on the ship, Rokusai. There can only be one captain on the ship. Using the player's map, so that's like the generic map, the company shows the lore master the route they intend to follow. This must connect the location where they are and the location chosen as their chosen destination. When tracing their path, the players must consider that their itinerary can rarely be drawn as the crow flies. That is, connecting the starting point to the destination via a straight line. Instead, due consideration must be given to the lie of the land. For example, high mountain ranges or swift running rivers can only be crossed at passes or bridges or fords. So again, going back to our, Foundry example, you would literally have them sort of, draw a path they intend to take. Then the lore master checks the map on the back of the paper and draws their itinerary on a copper of the journey log using its hex grid as a path traversing a number of hexes equal to those required. So basically you convert it into a hex. The path drawn on the log must not necessarily conform to the shape as traced by the players. Okay. Now, this notwithstanding, the players are encouraged to annotate landmarks they are traveling, like ruins or fords or bridges. Basically, you know, they can add to the map and make little notes and track the different terrain. Basically, a living map, which is really, really cool and really, really fun. Oh, hey, cool. Look, here's an example of a detail. Now, obviously, this assumes that your players are somewhat gifted at drawing maps, but, you know, we have Haldemir, Burin, Primula, Folko, and Holly, with the ponies and horses, Jokey, Willie, Old Tom, and Gus. And we can see here that it looks like they left Weathertop, and they're headed for Fornost. And this was kind of apparently they drew a path, and there was 2 events, a shortcut and a mishap. Journey can be dangerous and exciting. Events take place in specific spots along the journey. To determine where, the guide must make a marching test and make a travel roll. So, ideally, your guide is someone who is somewhat good at travel. Now, to be clear, you can't avoid an event. If it was a failure, it occurs 2 hexes away in the summer and spring, 1 hex away in the winter or autumn. If it was a success, it's 3 plus the number of success icons. So basically, events are probably not good because your goal is we want to get there with no muss or no fuss. So having a good guide can help you avoid unnecessary events, but can delay how many events you have, but you can never fully rid yourself of them. And I actually like this rule a lot because if you have someone who's really good at guide, then it's just like all your tests, all your travels will always be eventless, and that's kind of boring. At the same time, if you don't have someone who's good at guide, it's not like you're completely fucked and you can never go anywhere. To determine the precise nature of an event, the procedure described under event resolution must be applied. Once the event has been resolved, the guide goes again. Okay, so this is where, yeah, exactly, Derek. The 5.14 issue. It makes the rules go away, and that's no fun, right? Once you have somebody who's really good at marching and traveling, they go, cool, we don't have to have events anymore. Traveling is automatic. March. Okay. Ending the journey. The journey continues until you get the number of hexes left, and when this happens, you've reached your destination and journey. I'm assuming it means 5th edition, 2014 edition. Okay, so we're traveling, and every 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hexes, we get into an event. Eventually, we reach our destination. Okay. However, journeying represents travel fatigue. Fatigue represents a deeper level of weariness that a player hero accumulates while traveling, and only fully manifests itself once the journey is over. In game terms, the player heroes will likely end their journey with a number of fatigue points. Each fatigue point lowers your carrying capacity and your ability to function effectively. Remember, once your character's endurance score, your hit points basically, once they drop below your load value, how much gear you're carrying, your character becomes weary. That's a debuff. It's your D6s, the 1s, the 2s, and the 3s on your D6s become 0s. Fatigue counts as load. So if your character normally had a load of, let's say, 8, if they had 4 travel fatigue, their load now counts as 12. And thus, as soon as they start to lose a little bit of endurance, they become weary far easier. Fatigue points are recorded on the log sheet and cannot be shaken off while the journey is lasting. At the end of the journey, if you have mounts, they can help reduce the fatigue, which makes sense. Your mounts helped carry you or your gear. Then all player heroes can reduce their accumulated fatigue with a roll of travel. So everyone rolls travel. A success reduces the total fatigue of that hero by 1, plus 1 for every Tengwar ruin icon rolled, meaning 6s. So, how much fatigue do we get? Any remaining fatigue is recorded on the character sheet. They will get rid of it at the rate of 1 point for each prolonged rest that they take in a sheltered and safe refuge, i.e., not on the road. So for the most part, once you have travel fatigue, you're really not going to get rid of it until you're in a safe haven. So like while you're out on your adventure, that travel fatigue is sticking with you. Unless you really try to find a place that is both sheltered and safe. The length is equal to the number of hexes that they cross, plus 1 day for each hex that was a hard terrain. So if we look at our example here, you know, we kept out of the mountains, so it seems like that's probably pretty reasonable. So let's see here. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, because this is kind of on the edge of the woods. 7, 8, 9. So I'm going to say this was a 9-day journey. Oh, 7-day journey because they had a shortcut. Okay, so maybe that reduces the journey. But we'll see. I don't know. But if I had to count the hexes, I would say that this was a 9-day journey. If everybody's on a horse, divide that in half. But you should only allow everybody to ride horses if they're in good roads and good paths. You know, people have this crazy idea that horses can be used in mountains and hills and forests. And you might go, oh, I know people who go riding in the woods and the hills all the time. Yeah, on paths. You can force march. Instead, you can count 1 day for 2 hexes. So you can double up your speed. You can travel 2 hexes a day instead of 1 hex a day. But each player hero accumulates 1 additional point of fatigue for each day of force march. So if time is really pressing, you know, you can Gimli, Aragorn, and Legolas it, right? And just basically nonstop run, but you're going to accumulate a lot more fatigue. So, events. Journeys are long, but uneventful, or made exciting by many unexpected occurrences. Using the journey sequence in the previous pages, each journey will end up with 1 or more events based on the length of that journey. Once the lore master has identified the location where an event is going to take place, follow the following sequence. Select targets, determine the event, resolve the event. The lore master selects who will face the journey by rolling the die and using the event table below. So, on a 1 to 2, it's going to target your scouts. On a 3 through 4, it's going to target your lookouts. On a 5 through 6, it's going to target your hunters. Then you roll a d12 to determine what happens. So we can have, and then they're going to have to make a check. We have terrible misfortune. If the roll fails, the target is wounded and they gain 3 fatigue points. Despair. If the roll fails, everyone in the company gains 1 shadow point. Ill choices. The target gains a shadow point. A mishap. Add 1 day to the length of the journey and the target is 1 additional fatigue. Shortcut. If the roll succeeds, the journey gets reduced by a day. So it gets starting to get better here. On a 10, you have a chance meeting. If you succeed, no fatigue is gained, and the lore master improvises an encounter favoring the company. Okay. And then on a Gandalf rune, it's the roll succeeds, everyone in the company regains 1 hope due to a joyful sight. Now, remember, we talked about that some areas on the map are different color coded. If it's in a relatively safe area, you roll that d12 with advantage. If it's in a wild land, you roll it straight up. And if it's in a dark land, you roll it with disadvantage. So you're much more likely to roll the bad stuff. The roll result is then checked on the journey events table on page 112, which we just looked at. All entries detail a type of occurrence that the lore master uses to describe what happens. All events additionally cause everyone in the company to gain a certain amount of fatigue. Now, this is obviously going to require some amount of improvisation from you and the party. Because a shortcut is going to mean something very different from your lookouts to your scouts to your hunters. So here's the thing. This is a very simple mechanical framework. Now, to be fair, you're making your choice of where to travel. You set your path. Your guide is going to make a roll. And we obviously have ideas here that, like, for example, if you're in hard terrain, you might lose a die. If you're on the road, you might gain a die. All the things that still apply in this game to skill checks matter. You might have good gear that applies and makes sense, that you can, make a case for why you should gain a bonus die to your skill check. What is going to make this interesting is the GM interpreting this roll with this roll, right? And, communicating what that looks like and resolving it with a skill. Now, there's a couple things right off the bat that I really like about this travel system. We're not even finished yet, but Forbidden Lands, which I like. I showed you my cool Foundry thing. Forbidden Lands let you travel in 6-hour increments. This meant that you could travel 12 hours a day. That meant that each day you basically travel, you'd make a check, you'd travel 1 or 2 hexes, and then you would make a check and travel 1 or 2 hexes, and you did that every single day. That is the most grindy, boring way, I have to say, to do hex crawling, okay? Even if you know where you're going. What I like about this system is it has a guide, which is very similar to the role of the guide in Forbidden Lands. But instead, it basically says, you don't roll this every day. You don't roll this for the morning and then for the afternoon. You don't roll a random encounter every night they sleep. Instead, you make this guide test and determine, are you going to have an encounter after 3 days, 4 days, or 5 days? And this way, we can elid 5 days of travel as a cool little brief montage before we get to an event. And that means that this, in Forbidden Lands, I'll use an example. In Forbidden Lands, to make this journey would require, if we're leaving from Weathertop, it's going to be 1, 2, 3. So it's going to be like 2 checks just to move into these hexes. Then we have to make a camp, and the camp is going to require a check. Then there's going to be a random encounter, which is a check. Then the next day, we're going to do 2 more checks, plus everyone's going to be making hunting checks, plus everyone's going to be making lookout checks. Then there's going to be a camp check. Then there's going to be a random encounter check. And we've gone now 2 days. And then the next day, we travel. You know what I mean? Like, by the time we reach our location, we will have made, I'm not even kidding you, 20 or more dice rolls, which is way too many. So this particular journey, which is a journey of 8 or 9 days, reduced because of the shortcut, but 8 or 9 days, was resolved with what appears to be 2 checks by the guide and 2 checks for the events, which would have been a total of 4 checks. Now, Forbidden Lands is a survival game. You're absolutely correct. It is. It is tedious. Full stop. So I agree with what you're saying, and I don't think it was completely out of, inappropriate, but it was rather tedious, especially because 80% of the rolls were made by the guide. So it was just one person endlessly rolling. And by the way, the same thing is true in Dragonbane with Bushcraft. Anyone who's played Dragonbane and played it, overland and in a hex crawling way, ask them about Bushcraft and traveling. So we have information here about how to describe the event and how to make it make sense. So what does terrible misfortune looks like? What does despair look like? What does shortcut look like? What does chance meeting look like? Like, what does a joyful sight looks like to me? That's another cool piece of art. And that's it. That's the journey rules. So it's not quite a random encounter. The group is never going to, get attacked, I suppose get attacked by orcs or something like that along the way. It's a mechanical process to potentially add some fatigue and shadow to the group. But, we're not focused on tracking rations. We're not focused on tracking water units and torch units. It's not Forbidden Lands. It's not a survival game. But it is an opportunity for us to sort of paint some pictures and weave some fiction in with game mechanics. I think these rules are fine. I'm going to give these rules a B. I don't think they're great. I don't think they're amazing, but I also don't think they're meh. I think this actually is really, really cool for this type of game. I would hate for this game to have some sort of really detailed hex by hex crawling type rule. That just doesn't feel appropriate, right? Lord of the Rings travel scenes are important, but we always see them in the books and in the movie as montages, right? And I think that is the best way to treat these, as a series of montages. Would you be okay with RP instead of rolling? Never. I'm never okay with RP instead of rolling, ever. If we're doing role playing instead of rolling, I don't know why we're playing a game. I'm a savage like that, but that is how I personally feel. So I almost never let role playing games. I never let, because again, what is role playing? It's a whole Derek rant thing, but it's like playing the game is a role playing game. I don't think RP is a thing that exists actually. Like for example, Keith, would you be okay with someone RPing instead of rolling a combat? Would you be okay with them RPing instead of rolling, describing killing the dragon? Probably not. My guess is probably not. And so then the question is why? And maybe your answer is I would be okay with them doing that. And then okay, well, respect. I mean, you at that point you have passed the you have my approval. You don't need my approval, but you have it anyways. So Jordan, my initial reaction is the same as yours. I love these events because I would be very comfortable and have a lot of fun improvising. And quite frankly, I'm going to be fully transparent here. I have way more lore related to Lord of the Rings than most people. I'm by no means a super expert on Tolkien. Does anybody remember Wheel of Time in the first book, Eye of the World, when Moraine is taking the Emmonsfield kids out? And in the show, they have like a little song and a little ditty, but in the book, but in the movie too, but in the book, Moraine teaches them, they pass by the ruins of and she tells them about Manetheren, about their story, about what their song actually means. It's about Manetheren, which is the ancient human kingdom that fought in the Trolloc Wars, that was destroyed, sort of as this last heroic stand, and that their bloodline comes from those people, and that they should be very proud because Manetheren and the banner of the Red Eagle, all this other stuff. And it's a moment of story building along their journey. And relatively speaking, I see the journey rules as a way for me to do a little bit of Lord of the Rings lore dumping. And so for me, because I have this as my advantage, if the players were to, maybe the scouts, and they roll despair. Maybe I describe an ancient burial mound of Angmar, or they come across an ancient, battlefield where the forces of Angmar defeated the forces of Arthedain or Cardolan, the successor kingdoms to Arnor. And it's just a moment for me, a little bit, to, one, flex on them. Two, to share my love and knowledge of this world and its lore and its history with the players in a way that hopefully is somewhat more meaningful to them than me just literally giving them a lore dump. Now, I would try not to, oversell it too much. And I'm not saying I would literally do this every time, but as a GM of 30 plus years and someone who really likes Lord of the Rings, these give me a bunch of opportunities to sort of do things. So, so Derek says, I've let players succeed without a roll before because they came up with a clever plan before, but the dice exist to help us moderate uncertain outcomes. So I think you just answered the question. If the players have a great idea, and that idea or that clever plan is so good that it no longer is an uncertain outcome, then we don't need to roll, right? So Torchbearer calls this the good idea rule. And fundamentally, my belief is we should only be rolling the dice if, I'll quote this game. Simply put, the lore master should ask for a die roll only if there is a possibility that the player's chosen action might fail. If the description of an action does not leave any doubts about the outcome, then there is no need to make the roll. The action succeeds automatically. And I think that's great advice for almost anything, right? Because the roll is to moderate, right? Meaning, to govern uncertainty. If we have removed uncertainty, then there's no need to roll. So in your case, Derek, I completely agree with you, because the clever plan, the good idea, it doesn't matter whether there's role playing, whatever people define as role playing. Now, granted, there is a bias, there is an absolute bias that is introduced by this paragraph. Okay, the bias is that what might be a good idea to one lore master might not be a good idea to another lore master. One GM might say, Jordan might say, that's a cool, that's a great idea. Absolutely, make your skill roll. I'm going to give you a bonus die because, you're really well equipped for this, but there's still a risk and a chance of failure. Derek might say, oh, that's a great idea. No need to roll. You succeed. So yes, as a GM, you will inevitably introduce a certain level of bias to your game. You are going to put your thumbprint, you are going to put your imprimatur on every game that you run. And I don't think that's a bad thing. In fact, I think that's a good thing. It makes gaming a unique experience. It makes your game a reflection of you, of your players. It makes it a uniquely you experience. It really is truly a creative product. Now, I think the important thing is that bias doesn't overshadow the actions of the game and the actions of the players. So, for me, that's the delicate balance. That's where I see GMs taking it too far, for sure. So, but every group is going to find a natural, balancing point. I tend to try to have a light touch, and I tend I tend to not give too many what I'll call automatic successes because I'm always aware that, there's always a chance for failure. And it depends on how often you want to roll and do your players like rolling and all this other stuff. Generally speaking, I always have had players who, like to roll, like Rem's players. I'm not saying they're banging on their fists and they want to roll, but look, they came to the game ready to play, they're ready to roll some bones. And 9 times out of 10, my players would rather be told, hey, roll, but I'm going to give you 2 bonus dice to your roll rather than being told you succeed automatically. So, to a certain extent. But, you're going to find that this is part of how you handle this paragraph is part of defining who you are as a game master. It also is really important as your group, what motivates, why is your group here? We've talked before about campaigns as competition, right? Players who play role-playing games because they want to try to win the game. They want to try to beat the game. And whether you want to admit it or not, even in games with GM bias, you have to be very careful. Because if you're not careful, what players who think that way will turn the game into is instead of trying to beat the system, they will be trying to beat you. And I'm sure if you have sit back and self-reflect, you will be aware that there are certain players who know you better. In other words, when it comes time to do the council phase, you have a positive attitude towards you, and they understand your personality and your motivations and what you want to hear. And so they get a lot of bonus dice when they are trying to convince you that their idea is a good one and should be rewarded with, say, automatic success. And what they have changed the game from is from beating the challenge of the road to, can I convince Derek? Right? It's kind of like I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun you. I don't need to beat the One Ring 2nd edition. I just need to beat the lore master, the game master. Because if I can convince them, they are the final say about whether or not we even engage the rules. And you have to be very, very, very careful about this. And the reason I say that is because you are going to have some character. You're going to have some player. And this is important, whether you want to admit it or not. You are going to have some player who put, every session, they get skill points. And they have invested at the character creation, and after 5 or 6 or 7 sessions, they have invested in a skill like healing. And they have 4 ranks in healing, and they're very proud of their healing. And that is a big part for them. This is a core part of why we play role-playing games. Whether you want to admit it or not, a big part of the reason we play role-playing games, there are very few role-playing games that don't have any sort of progression mechanic of reflecting your character's growing strength, of reflecting that your character has the ability to influence the game. If somebody in your player, and I like Mr. Rawlings, the tyranny of the eloquent, if there's some player in your group who knows how to push the DM's buttons and knows how, and not in a bad way, in a good way, and their character comes in with no ranks in healing, and they are always stepping in front of that other player to make the healing roll because they know what to say. Oh, guys, I have a good idea. Just let me got this. And then they proceed to hop in front of the GM of the other player and then convince the DM that their 0 rank healing character makes this healing check because they have a great idea. And the GM says, that is a really good idea. I'm going to award you success. There's no condition for failure. You get your success. You have to be very careful. And the reason why goes way back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the game when we talked about the council phase. The best games, the best combats, the best councils, the best journeys, the best role-playing games challenge the player and the character. The player and the character. If you are too liberal with your application of this rule, If you are too liberal with your application of this rule, if the description of the action leaves no doubts as to its outcome, then there is no need to make a roll. The action succeeds automatically. If you are too liberal with this rule, you have now moved too far in the other direction. Remember, a great role-playing game, a great adventure, challenges the player and the character. If you're too liberal with this rule, you have forgotten to challenge the character. And now you are only challenging the player. This is a mistake. If you only ever ask for skill rolls and you ignore what the players are saying, then you're focusing too much on the characters. What makes role-playing games unique, what makes them awesome, is that merging. It's that melding of fiction and mechanics. It's that merging of player and character. So I love this rule. I mean, you should use this rule, but use it judiciously. Because if you use it too much, then number one, you risk the tyranny of the eloquent. I love that term. I'm stealing it. Rawlings, I stole it. But also you risk making your game not be about the characters, and now it's just about the players. Okay? So, just something to think about. And that's it. That's the council rule. That's the council rules and the journey rules. So yeah, I think council and journey both get a solid B from me. I think combat gets an A-. So all in all, I think that's pretty good. And honestly, if I was playing in this game and we were actually, legitimately doing a bunch of both, right? Where we were doing some of our adventuring was, we were doing a combat scene and then a council scene and then a journey scene and then sort of just a scene to maybe, because you gotta remember, not every scene has to be combat or council or journey. It's just those are the three that have these little bit more detailed rules. Sometimes a scene might just you're at the Inn of the Prancing Pony. You're looking to make a connection. You might make a couple skill checks. It's not a council. It's not a combat, and it's not a journey. It's just a scene. Derek, I think the art in this book is amazing. Now, obviously, this style of art is very, Symbaroum-esque, very Free League-esque, so I love it so much. Yeah, I mean, I think it's all in all, I really liked the rules for these mechanics. I think this is really, really good stuff. And I'd be excited to play them. Yeah, I mean, Derek, it's no different than playing a co-op game and having the quarterback, rule where you have one player who's just kind of calling all the shots. So that is going to do it for journeys and for adventuring phase. So all we have left to cover on our deep dive is the fellowship phase, where the players kind of take back the initiative. And then we have a chapter on the lore master, where we'll cover how the rising power of the shadow works, how adversaries work, orcs and evil men, and rules for treasure, and of course, the Eye of Sauron, or the Eye of Mordor. And then there's lastly a chapter on the world, if you want some information about Eriador. I will say that this piece of artwork is another one of my absolute favorites from this book, and a book full of amazing art. I love this. I love the style of the painting, and love it. I love this too because if you look at the bottom of the page, I love that you can see what looked to be like a patrol of orcs, climbing up and making their way in. So yeah, well. So any questions? Any thoughts? Conversations? Happy to hang out. I don't really have anything else going on. Tomorrow we're going to be doing a first look at Worlds. Where is my Worlds Without Number? We're going to be looking at Worlds Without Number. I don't know where my Worlds Without Number is. It's somewhere. Oh, it's all the way up there. And then as for the deep dive on this, we'll probably finish it up this weekend. No, the vote was for Worlds Without Number. That was the one that Golda Cat paid money for. So yes and no. I will say this. I first became aware of Kevin Crawford and Sin Nome back in like 2010 during the 4th edition era. And, I've used his stuff for a long time. I really loved his Red Tide and Echo Resounding books, which were awesome. And I think that a lot of the rules in those got kind of folded into his later Without a Number books. But the long and the short of it is I never really played his role-playing games. I didn't really give them too much look. They kind of looked like a quasi-modern 3E old school kind of hack of Traveler. That was Stars Without Number. And I wasn't really particularly interested in that and in another D20 based system. But I loved his world building stuff and I loved his faction rules and I loved all that other stuff. And so I kickstarted Worlds Without Number. Now I understand that there's now Ashes Without Number, Cities Without Number. I don't know that I need all of that. So I do. I think it's a great resource. I think it's a great book. We'll see if it's a first look because honestly, I didn't really look at Worlds Without Number, the game engine. I know that it has shock damage, which is odd, damage on a miss, but that's about the only thing I know. So we'll see what we get there. Derek, have I run this game? You mean the One Ring? No, I have not. Sadly, I have played it once. I played the original starter set one shot. Well, actually, it's a 5-shot, but I played the first adventure in that 5-shot, where everyone's a hobbit. It was really kind of cool. When the original starting set that came out from the game, like 4 years ago or something, 5 years ago. I don't remember. It was a Gen Con after COVID, I think, is when I played it. But so I played it like 4 years ago. But I know I've never run it. Keith, unfortunately, I have not. When I ran the One Ring, Mark Lore says, the toughest thing for me was figuring out what's an appropriate story and inciting incident. Also, what happens when the players get to the adventuring site after the journey. I mean, that's basically the gist of any adventure, I would suppose. I mean, the good news, Mark Lore, is that we know in this game, an adventure is only supposed to last between, we'll say, 2 to 3 sessions. One's probably too short, but 2 to 3 sessions. So you don't have to think about it in terms of like a PF2 adventure where it's like this massive, huge thing. I would look as inspiration. I would look at like the adventure sites from games like Forbidden Lands and Dragonbane. Those are great examples. I think the kind of adventures and adventure sites that you could use for that. And because most Dragonbane and most Forbidden Lands adventure sites are actually really quite small. Let me see if I can find Forbidden Lands one real quick. I assume I have one. Forbidden Lands, Player's Book, Player's Handbooks, Game Master's Guide. Okay. So yeah, okay. So this is Weatherstone, which is one of the adventure sites that is included in the main book. And it's a castle. And there's like some background about it. Obviously, this is pre-written. There's a lot of detail here that you don't necessarily need when you're just, making an adventure. And it's an adventure site. It's a castle. It's a dungeon. And it is comprised of, this is it. This is the dungeon map. This is the location map. The dungeon is comprised of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 locations. There's the entrance hall. There's like the barracks. There's the other tower. There's like the main tower where there's some harpies living. And then there's this crane. That's all literally what it is. It's like an old crane that they used to use to bring up supplies from the ravine. And this is it. This is the whole adventure site. This is the whole dungeon. It's 10 locations. And it's kind of more of a sketchy, it's more of an illustration, really, than a map. And that's it. This is the whole adventure. So, my group played through this in 2 sessions. And so this is the kind of scale of stuff that I would expect you would want to use and the kind of thing that you would want to use in the One Ring. So, and Dragonbane is very much the same as well. So Dragonbane adventure sites, are usually 4, 5, 6, 7 locations. And as GM Scott is saying, very portable. You can basically take it into almost any other game system, especially one that's not as like fastidious and hyper specific as, a game like, because if you're expecting to have a combat in every room, then you need a lot more rules. But remember, in the One Ring, you might have a combat every other session. So in this entire location, there might be just one fight, If there were 2, that would be a lot. And I can tell you from experience that when my group encountered this dungeon, they only had 2 fights. They fought some weird hybrid demon slug thing, and then they fought a bunch of harpies up in the ruined tower in 9. And as I recall, Smith, I think, over-channeled and cast Fireball and just fried them all instantly. So it was very satisfying. He just killed them all instantly. So it was literally one roll, and they were all dead. But, yeah, And GM Scott, we just covered this the other day. That's right. Mythic Bastion Land has a fantastic system. That's the character sheet. Mythic Bastion Land has an incredible system for, I just can't seem to find it, but it has an incredible system for creating cool little micro adventures. So you should definitely check that out too from Mythic Bastion Land. Keith, take care. I'm going to be heading out myself. So yeah, obviously, we're going to finish this up. I know people are probably sick of me talking about the One Ring, but look, I was going to be going through the book anyway, so you guys get to benefit from reading through it with me, I guess, and getting some of my thoughts. We did finish that tip goal last time, so I am going to talk to Bob and see if we can get maybe some folks over here to the studio to break her in and play some Overhill and Underhill starter set. By the way I understand it, this is like a 1.5 shot, so maybe probably plan on 2 sessions. So not a huge thing, but maybe we can have a little fun with it. And then, depending on how cool the rules are in this Moria book, there is apparently, like I said, a rule set in the back of this book for solo play where you play as a company of dwarves attempting to retake Moria. And I thought it would be really cool, maybe potentially, to play it with a stream. And so it wouldn't be really a solo play. It would almost be like playing with you guys. And I thought that'd be kind of neat. So maybe we'll check that out and have some fun with it. Basically, anything I can do by myself is good, because then I don't have to worry about trying to jump through the hurdles of schedules of 4 or 5 other individuals who have really complicated and messy lives. So, I'm really looking forward to cracking into this Moria book. I've only super flipped through it and it was just like, ooh, there's a lot of cool stuff in here and a lot of fun elements in there as well. So, yeah, should be cool. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about Worlds Without Number and do another first look there. And, we'll keep on keeping on, trying to keep some cool stuff. Again, I'm still trying to figure out how to make this channel work. It's always been a side project of mine, a side hustle. And now it's my primary job. So I got to make it pay the bills and, try not to change anything, try not to disrupt the good stuff that we've got going on here, but also trying to figure out ways that maybe I can provide extra value to my viewers and my patrons. And hopefully that is, justifies some amount of extra compensation along the way at some point. Obviously people have talked about me doing some sort of product or Kickstarters, which is cool, but it's a lot of work and it's not just an easy thing. And of course, obviously anything that I would ever make, I would want to make sure it's done right and done properly, not just something you slap together and ship out. People have done that and they've been really burned by that. And that's absolutely the last thing I would ever want to do. But now that I'm not working, I do have the time. If I did want to commit to, spending 6 months, 12 months, dedicated working on something, potentially with some, some other folks to help me out. I do have that luxury, so that might be an option. So we'll see. I don't know. In the meantime, I'm looking forward to playing some more role-playing games with some of my patrons coming up in 2026 and with my friends, hopefully here in the studio so that we can make use of all this really cool tech that we have and get to play with you guys and have fun. In the meantime, more first looks, more GM deep dives. We'll talk about Daggerheart, Project Shadow Deep, all that jazz. Commander Snookums, yes, to a certain extent, but obviously, 50 people playing in a mega game at $10 a month is awesome, but that's $500 a month, and after Patreon fees and payment fees, that's $500 becomes $400, and $400 is not nothing. But we only have 2 mega games, so if both of them were that big, we'd have $800 a month. It's not quite enough to make a living on, but yes, they are very popular and they are very cool. But even thus, I mean, I don't want to overdo it. I want to make sure that they're all good and they're all well supported and they're all well played, because for a mega game to be successful, it needs to have the right, has a certain critical density of people. Well, we'll be back tomorrow to talk about Worlds Without Number. We'll definitely be spending some time talking about the world creation rules in there, I'm sure. But also we'll be looking at the game, and maybe there's some cool nuggets there that you can steal for your Pathfinder game, your 5e game, or maybe your upcoming One Ring game. We'll take a look at it. But either way, I hope we see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Peace out, everybody.